Hello and welcome to Sweden Innovation Days. We're starting really soon and I just wanted to give you a warm welcome. And a spoiler alert, the program over these 4 days are really intense and interesting. We have more than 250 speakers over 3 different stages in 100 sessions. Main stage, session stage and the side events. Make sure to explore the program and the sessions you find interesting that you can add to your own calendar. You can also meet many of the event hosts in the exploration area. Engage in the chat, and we hope that you'll make many new interesting contacts. And as of this morning, we were more than 3,500 participants from 88 countries signed up to the event. And now, let me introduce the pre-inauguration, who will give you an overview of the Swedish ecosystem. We will be talking about pioneering the possible, introducing the Swedish innovation ecosystem. In this session, you'll meet Regina Sommer from Vinnova, Sweden's innovation agency, Anna Hammarberg from Business Sweden, and Stina Lantz from Swedish Incubators and Science Parks, Niklas Karlsson from the Swedish Energy Agency. And I will see you again at the grand opening, 2 p.m. CET.
Hi, and very, very welcome to the pre-inauguration of Sweden Innovation Days 2022. My name is Regina Sommer, and I am the Chief Strategy Officer for International Collaboration at Vinnova, the Swedish Innovation Agency. This session will give you a short introduction to the Swedish innovation system, our great country, and much more. Together with me in the studio, I have Anna Hammarberg from Business Sweden. You are an investment manager at Business Sweden. We have Niklas Karlsson from the Energy Agency, Director for International Collaborations. And we have Stina Lantz, the Vice President for Swedish Incubators and Science Parks. Very welcome, all of you. Well, Anna, please, tell us about Business Sweden's role in the Swedish innovation ecosystem.
Thank you, Regina. Well, Business Sweden is commissioned by the Swedish government and the Swedish industry to support Swedish companies to grow global sales and international companies to establish, invest and expand business in Sweden, as well as entering partnership with Swedish companies, innovation and R&D partnerships. We are 500 people in total on 40 markets globally. We do provide hands-on support and strategic advice to companies, and we do this in close collaboration with Swedish embassies, national and regional partners in Sweden. In order to do this mission, we are focusing on 7 business ecosystems. And this business ecosystem reflects Sweden's areas of strength and innovation leadership. All with solution and technologies supporting the green and digital transformation in Sweden and globally. And these 7 are smart energy, smart transportation, new materials, smart industry, life sciences, digital technologies, and sustainable lifestyle and food technologies. And if you want to learn more about these ecosystems, we do have several interesting sessions later on this week. The strategy within these ecosystems are aligned with, well, national and industry strategies and the regional smart specialization strategies. And a key to success is, of course, collaboration between all these actors.
And a lot of what you mentioned, Anna, have connections with initiatives also from Vinnova. And Vinnova is a government agency under the Ministry of Enterprise and Innovation. We are about 200 employees, and we have an office in Stockholm, one in Tel Aviv, in Silicon Valley, and of course also in Brussels. What we do is that we identify the challenges that we have in society. We help mobilize the actors in Sweden, and of course we fund important innovation projects that can make a real difference in our society. We strongly believe in collaboration for transformation. And one of our biggest investments have been the strategic innovation programs. And today we have 17 strategic innovation programs that focus on specific areas and specific specializations that we have in Sweden. And we fund some of these together with the Energy Agency too. The important thing with the strategic innovation programs is that the innovation actors are in the driver's seat. They set their programs and they drive their programs. And of course, these stakeholders, they collaborate on a national level. And on a more regional level, we have another program that we call the Vinväxt program. So these Vinväxt hubs are all around Sweden on a regional level where they collaborate with specific areas to create great growth. We also fund our incubators all around Sweden. And here we have the National Incubator Program. And during these 4 days, you will get to know the strategic innovation programs, you will get to know the Vinväxt hubs, and also our incubators, and not to mention definitely the science parks that we have all around Sweden. An agency that we collaborate with a lot is the Swedish Energy Agency. And Niklas, please tell us more about what you do.
Thank you, Regina. So the Swedish Energy Agency, we act as the principal agency for policy issues related to energy in Sweden. And we sort under the Ministry of Infrastructure, and the Director General, who you will see later on, he's appointed by the Swedish government. And the Swedish Energy Agency currently employs 440 people, both in Stockholm, but primarily in Eskilstuna, where we have our headquarters. Our vision is affordable and clean energy. And our mission is to lead society's transition for sustainable energy solutions. And we do this through financing R&D, but also market activities, both in Sweden and abroad for Swedish companies.
Mm-hmm. Stina, you represent most incubators and science parks in Sweden. Tell us more about your organization.
Absolutely. Thank you, Regina. Swedish Incubators and Science Parks is a member organization consisting of 61 incubators and science parks from north to south. And to explain the science park is often the heart in the regional innovation ecosystems, and they are close to the universities, and they serve as a hotspot for talent and recruitment. Together, they have 5,000 companies located in these science parks, and that's everything from, the small and innovative startups all the way up to Ericsson, ABB, Scania, and Volvo, and so on. We also have a lot of international companies that has their R&D operations in these science parks. Then we, of course, also have the incubators, as you were talking about before. And they are market complementary. I would say all of our members are non-profit. I think that's important. The incubators are market complementary, so they focus on startups that can give the society a really huge impact if they succeed. And the incubators are often owned by the municipalities and or the universities in combination, and incubate from all various kinds of different sectors. Since 2014, the incubators in the National Incubation Program has actually incubated 6,500 startups. It's quite a great number.
That's amazing.
Yeah. We are a very small country. We're only 10 million people in Sweden. So when we operate nationally together, all of us in our members, then we can also support startups from north of Sweden to access the ecosystems in south of Sweden, for example. And these days, for us, is also an opportunity to grow those networks internationally.
Mm. And the four of us really represent, we are four totally different actors, and that is also mirroring the Swedish innovation ecosystem. The four different actors, we all collaborate on a daily basis, and this is actually a little bit how the Swedish innovation ecosystem is organized. We are organizations from different sectors, different parts of Sweden, and we all collaborate. And this part, the collaboration part here, I would say is really in our DNA, and that makes us a little bit special. We believe that this is actually one of the reasons that we are such a successful innovation country. And other key elements that are very important to mention is, of course, that Sweden invests about 3.4% of our GDP goes to research and innovation. Of these, 1/3 comes from the government. 2/3 is invested by our great industries. And this is, of course, very important for us to having a great base. Another important base for our innovation ecosystem is that 44% actually of the Swedes have continued their education after high school. And this makes, of course, a very competent population. And we have 61 universities, both private and public universities. We have 61 universities and university colleges, actually, from the southern parts of Sweden to the northern parts of Sweden. We also have more than 100 test and demo beds all around Sweden. And these are organized under RISE, the Research Institutes of Sweden. But is there anything more that makes Sweden such a great country? What would you say, Anna?
You are totally right, Regina. I mean, Sweden tops innovation indexes, ranked as the world's second most innovative country. But also ranking all other different kind of indices and rankings, from competitiveness to ease of doing business and sustainability and creating unicorns. But in the end, I mean, business is only as good as its people. And if we look behind the scenes, so what has made Sweden, such a success and leading place for innovation? Well, living and working in Sweden, that means being a part of a modern society with a strong welfare system. It's free education, including university studies, free healthcare, and child support. This creates a safety net for individuals, making it possible to take risks, try an alternative career, or maybe develop a business idea. It also creates high quality of life and a work-life balance. This is integrated into the Swedish culture, I would say, and it enables also equal opportunities for men and women. Making it possible to actually combine a family life with a career. Sweden has the highest number of female employment rates in Europe. If we add to this an extensive parental leave of 480 days, right to work part-time with children, and taking a minimum 5 weeks of vacation paid. You might think then that nothing gets done here in Sweden, but it's quite the opposite. The Swedes are hard workers when we work. Sweden's GDP per hour worked is among the highest in Europe, and the labor productivity also one of the highest in Europe. And that has something to do with our mindset and the Swedish management style, actually. This is about empowerment of personnel and delegation of decision-making, ensuring a bottom-up problem-solving approach and co-creation that actually shows results.
Do you see this among the startups, Stina?
Definitely. I would say the get shit done culture, doers rather than talkers, absolutely. Flat organizations, that's also an equal. And then, of course, this social safety net allows us to dare becoming entrepreneurs. We can start a business and then we can fail and then we can start again without the risk of losing everything.
Yeah. And what would you say, Niklas, is one of the reasons for us being a top innovation country in the world? From an energy perspective?
Yeah, I think we're really good at helping a lot of companies, but I think we're especially good at helping the cutting-edge companies with the cutting-edge technologies. And this is both through support, but also through financing. And I think the aim, of course, is to support the next unicorns. I mean, that's why we go to work on a daily basis. And one example would be Northvolt, which has developed itself as one of the leading battery manufacturers in Europe from northern Sweden, which is a very new phenomenon. And you will hear more about Northvolt and their endeavors later on in the program. So that's quite an interesting journey.
Definitely. And as you can hear, well, we have a great innovation platform in Sweden, but it's not enough that we have it by ourselves. We need to collaborate on an international platform, international level. And of course, the last years, Vinnova has worked a lot with creating innovation platforms that where we want to create long-term relationships that generate innovation projects. We call this international innovation initiatives. And today we have 11. So for example, with Canada, we have Sweden-Canada Innovation Initiative. With India, we have Sweden-India Innovation Initiative. And there will be a session on Thursday. On Wednesday there will be a session at 9:15 Central European Time, focusing on different funding opportunities to create joint collaboration projects. And of course, you can all join these communities. We have specific LinkedIn groups for each one, so just search for them there. Niklas, how important would you say that internationalization is for your organization?
I mean, they're critical. I mean, without them, we don't have much. So, for instance, we have 6 country programs from the Swedish Energy Agency that we work on a daily basis. But on top of that, we also have our thematic focus areas. Just to mention a few areas: bioenergy, sustainable healthcare, electromobility, including batteries and hydrogen, but also district heating and cooling. So, I mean, these are all international platforms that sort of facilitate export and, of course, investment promotion. It's all part of Team Sweden. So this is maybe the most important aspect of it all, that we're coming together to sort of increase our strength in a combined offering. And I think that's what we need to continue to do, but also need to work even harder on.
Yeah. And of course, behind all these organizations are very talented people. And Business Sweden works a lot with talent attraction. Can you explain more about that?
Yes, we do have a joint talent attraction program together with you at Vinnova. And it's about scouting for international entrepreneurs and scale-ups to open accelerator programs in Sweden. And if you want to learn more, we do have a session on Wednesday at 10, where you can hear more about this. And I would also like to highlight our session this week, showcasing Sweden's leadership in 3 ecosystems and opportunities for collaborations, opportunities for international collaborations in Sweden. The first one is on Tuesday at 5:00 p.m. It's our life sciences team that will showcase the Swedish life science ecosystems with a lot of interesting companies and investors participating. And on Thursday at 11, we will have our smart energy and transportation team that will showcase the Swedish leadership within sustainable batteries and electrification of transport, and also that with a lot of interesting companies in Sweden and initiatives. So please join us in that.
Great sessions that you don't want to miss. Niklas, is it anything that you would like to highlight in the program?
Well, on Thursday, we will focus more on sustainability, and you will get the chance to hear more about the different promotion activities, but also activities that we are planning. But more importantly, you will also hear more about the companies that we have supported historically. So you will get to hear more about Northvolt, about Climeon, about Greater Den, but also some of the more familiar faces such as Ericsson, Scania, Hitachi Power Grid. So I think that's something that could be of interest for many of our viewers and listeners.
Sounds super interesting. And as we speak, there is a matchmaking going on. And this is not any matchmaking event. This is a huge, I would say, a world record matchmaking. And please, Stina, tell us more about that, because you're the ones responsible for the matchmaking and organizing it.
Yes, absolutely. Ignite Sweden, we have, together with our members and also international top partners, created this matchmaking. We've been working on it since before summer, actually. And these days, during these days, not less than 270 impact startups from 11 countries are meeting with 78 large companies in what we call needs-based business-to-business meetings. And we have been doing this quite many years in Ignite, and we know for sure that 1 out of 6 of these startups will, in a couple of months, close a deal based on these first introductions that they do during these days. You will also have the opportunity to meet many of them. They will enter the Mainstage to tell you a little bit more about the experience, and we also have some funders sessions in the program throughout these days. So make sure to look out for startups.
It sounds amazing, and it's so impressive, the work you do. I would like to thank you all for sharing your knowledge and information about Sweden and the Swedish innovation ecosystem. And now I just would like to say, please enjoy these days. Take the opportunity to chat, to network in the different chats, to enjoy the super professional speakers that we have in our program, and have great innovation days. Thank you.
Welcome to Sweden Innovation Days 2022. We are here to address the Sustainable Development Goals together. 4 days with a bold mission. We need to innovate how we innovate. Sure, it's a bit of a tongue twister, and it might sound like an entertaining one-liner to grab your attention. But as you'll see over the course of today and the next few days, addressing the need to innovate how we innovate encapsulates an ambition to actually succeed. A sense of urgency as old formulas and processes are failing us, and a humbleness before the daunting task of the challenges ahead. My name is Aurora Belfrag. I'm an economist, technology investor, and transformation strategist. And I have the great honor of being your Sherpa throughout these days, talks, panels, questions, and insights. So, ambitious summits like these requires a committed and brave initiator and host. And let's kick off today with a word of welcome from our host Vinnova and their Chief Strategy Officer of International Collaboration, Regina Sommer.
Thank you very much, Aurora, and very, very welcome to Sweden Innovation Days 2022. We have been looking forward to these days. Very welcome to all of you that joined us last year, and of course, very welcome to all new members of the Swedish innovation community. I am responsible for Sweden Innovation Days, but I really have to say that this is a Team Sweden effort. Together with the Swedish Energy Agency, the Swedish incubators and science parks, Ignite and AI Sweden, we have managed to set a program that I really hope that you enjoy during these 4 days. And of course, not the least, also enjoy and have use for in the future. But the whole Swedish innovation ecosystem is participating in Sweden Innovation Days in one way or the other. And if you want to have one door in to Innovation Sweden, this is it. So you are at the right place. This year, we have about 90 countries participating, 500 matchmaking meetings between hundreds of corporates and startups from all around the globe. And also 250 speakers, more than 100 sessions. So you can just pick from the candy box here. Sweden has an amazing innovation ecosystem, and you will hear a lot about this for days ahead. And some of the greatest strengths are innovation hungry, tech savvy. We are great at collaboration, and we are very reliable. And it doesn't end here. We always look for new friends to collaborate with. And of course, we need to have new friends all around the world, from all around the world, to achieve the global goals together. We are pioneering the possible to transform our society in the broadest sense. And during these days, I hope you learn more about Sweden, our innovation ecosystem, and most important, find new partners to pioneer the possible together, so we all have a chance to achieve the global goals. Enjoy these days, and don't forget to have fun. Thank you.
Thank you, Regina. And as we all know, one of the core elements of innovation transformation is team, which elegantly allows me to introduce today's co-moderator, who's just that, Team and Perspectives. Dan Hill, Director of Strategic Innovation Design, Vinnova. Dan, I'm so glad that you will join us today with
Pleasure.
thoughts and perspectives. Could you tell us, when you're not in a fancy studio like this, what is your day job? What do you do?
I'm very rarely in a fancy studio like this. I'm usually on the ground working in and around systems with my colleagues and collaborators, trying to figure out how systems get put together, where we can make intervention points, then demonstrate that in reality through prototypes and other things, and then learn from that. So the agency, like I work for, but then the system generally, understands how we can change.
And before we kick off today, and all these days actually, what are your expectations? What do you hope to learn or achieve?
I'm really looking forward to seeing how we get this balance of what's happening in Sweden on the ground and then with international perspectives. So later we have Rowan Conway and Bani Banerjee from the UK and I guess the US respectively, talking about the international scene. But then we also zoom into Blekinge later, and we also hear from general directors in state agencies here in Sweden. So this balance of global and local, that's what I'm really interested in.
And you have a slot as well.
I forgot that. Yes, I do. I'll be talking later, so I'll talk more about that later on.
That will be one of my highlights. So Dan, I think let the show begin. And as you'll see from the speaker lineup, to achieve the global goals, missions need to be addressed both bottom up and top down. So let's open Sweden Innovation Days from the top. Welcome Sweden's Minister for Business, Industry and Innovation, Karl-Petter Thorwaldsson.
Welcome to Sweden Innovation Days, Sweden's biggest global digital innovation event of the year. An international platform for co-creation to reach the United Nations global goals. This conference brings together actors from around the world to share best practices and experiences with the aim of creating innovation collaboration with a focus on the sustainable development goals. I would like to thank Vinnova and its partners from Swedish incubators and science parks, Ignite Sweden, AI Sweden and the Swedish Energy Agency for organizing this event. As the Minister for Business, Industry and Innovation in the Swedish government, I'm proud to say that Sweden is a global innovation leader. We will not have reached this position without a strong belief in openness, freedom, free trade and international collaboration. And today, international collaboration is more important than ever. To solve global challenges, we need to innovate across national and sectorial borders. This is why the event is great chance for you to learn more about the Swedish innovation ecosystem and its great organizations. To find future collaboration partners, we believe in the power of co-creation across sectors to create the innovative solution needed for a sustainable future, as well as securing jobs and competitiveness. Sweden has a long history of collaboration between public, private and research sectors. These principles hold true also for international innovation collaboration, where we aim to gather stakeholders from multiple parts of society and across borders. Our bilateral partnership with Germany, France and India are excellent examples. Sweden has the goal of becoming the first fossil-free welfare state in the whole world. To achieve this, the Swedish government is bringing together stakeholders in several cooperation initiatives, such as the Innovation Partnership Programme and the roadmap developed within the Fossil Free Sweden initiative. Steel production as a good example with the first fossil-free iron pellets, one of Europe's largest battery factories. An ambitious plan on future electrification of the society would not have been possible without a strong focus on innovation. During the four upcoming days, we will demonstrate how Sweden is pioneering the possible through innovation and new collaboration to transform our society. A system perspective is key. Therefore, we have chosen to focus this year's Sweden Innovation Days on how to create joint missions and how we can work broader and more inclusive with a system perspective. The Swedish Innovation Days are an invitation to cooperation, co-creation and deepened relations with the Swedish innovation system. I hope that the coming days will inspire you and spark of new ideas. Thank you for joining us and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Minister Thorwaldsson. And let's consider the summit opened. Please engage in the chat. Please use the hashtag. Create conversations, thought, and inspire others through LinkedIn. And now, it's escaped no one that we face planetary and biospheric collapse unless we transform how we live and reorder society in alignment with nature's boundaries, as we've previously ignored them. And you wonder, so who's the audience during these 4 days of thinkers and doers speaking? My honest guess is that you are already convinced, and if we're lucky, maybe someone curious joins us today. So let's not kid ourselves. The next few days will have minimal direct impact. However, I cannot understate the importance of indirect impact. You are key. Key in your sector, key in your community, key in your family, how you vote. And my pledge is that over the next few days is an opportunity to arm you with arguments, tools, insight, maybe a little fear, energy, and a huge sense of urgency. So you can strengthen your agency and make a bigger difference in your sector, quicker, and have the energy to innovate and sometimes just withstand a bit of the gloom and naysayers. Because transformation was never easy. But failure is not an option. And I'd like to introduce two of the key players in the Swedish innovation ecosystem. They are heavyweights in their own right, as well as represent the most important stakeholders in the Swedish ecosystem. And they contribute to addressing the Sustainable Development Goals. Please welcome Darja Isaksson, Director General of Vinnova, Sweden Innovation Agency, and Robert Andrén, Director General, Sweden Energy Agency.
Hello.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you for the introduction. So I'm Darja, and I'm the Director General of Vinnova, Sweden's Innovation Agency. To innovate means to radically improve something, a technology, a product, a business model, a way of working. To innovate, therefore, for our generation, working towards hard planetary deadlines, is not any longer merely a matter of staying competitive. It is an existential necessity for our generation. We must innovate every single value chain, every consumption pattern, every city. To lie safely within planetary boundaries, we need to build and transform into society that lies there, do it in a socially sustainable way, and that will give us an opportunity for a society in the future that's better than the one we leave behind for many. Now, Sweden is since a long time a global leader in innovation. We have a world-class startup ecosystem. We have a breadth of multinational innovation leaders, varying from music and retail to steel production and mobility. And in our country, we can now see that this transformation has already begun. New ecosystems are in fact emerging. They're driven by strong partnerships with really ambitious agendas working together across industry as well as country borders. This creates hope where previously there was little of it, and opportunities for value creation for many. The Swedish Innovation Days are important to us in this ecosystem because as a global leader in innovation, we're acutely aware that no one can do this alone. And in fact, strong international partnerships have always been, and now even more so, key to drive innovation forward. We need to be able to continue to collaborate and take risk together. So as the Swedish Innovation Agency, therefore, Vinnova's mission is simply to open up opportunities for the innovations that make a difference. We support actors in our ecosystem through funding experiments, through giving opportunity and access to resources needed to lower thresholds for innovation. But we also work together closely with others to, for instance, define joint missions that can include a breadth of actors. I'm proud to say that, for instance, with the sisters agencies represented here today, we have signed a climate contract together with 23 municipalities in Sweden connected to the EU mission of climate neutral and smart cities. Now, we want to continue to nurture strong collaborations, and that's coming back to these days in the Swedish Innovation Week. This is the opportunity for you to listen to many examples of how we do this and learn from each other. But even more importantly, you get a chance to listen, learn, reflect, and perhaps even meet each other. Open up opportunities for new collaborations. That's the most important value coming out of these days, because now is the time to act. Now is the time when we need the entrepreneurial drive that has the capacity to take new knowledge and bring it to fruit in terms of actual innovations that make a difference. So I just want to say a warm thank you to all of you participating in this important week. I'm looking forward to it very much.
Robert?
Thank you, and thank you Daria. I'm delighted to stand here beside you because we are companions in trying to achieve a sustainable and better world, for sure, in many processes, and you mentioned a few here. Friends of Sustainability. The many recent reports on accelerated global warming shows and underlines the importance of a true paradigm shift in the way we go about things in our society. We desperately need a sustainability transformation. And at the core of such a transformation lies a clean energy transition, knowing that 75% of all greenhouse gas emissions are energy related. A decisive component in the transformation and the clean energy transition is green innovations. Innovations in techniques and technical innovations, but also in business models and policy development. And we will need innovations that can move whole value chains, that can move whole systems from a linear to a circular approach, to move whole communities. And what has been said earlier is so important. We need to be innovative in how we work with innovations. So what about getting more investors to ask whether an innovation is compatible with the Paris Agreement or not, instead of merely looking at the return of interest? What about start putting a climate impact label on an innovation? A label on the potential of an innovation to reduce emissions if it is deployed large scale. A label that, of course, should be an added value for an investor when decide where and how much to invest. My agency, the Swedish Energy Agency, has taken an initiative to develop a framework for such a label, an avoided emissions framework. And so far, it has been received with positive notes by those that have applied it. I am a strong believer that Sweden can punch far beyond our weight class when it comes to lead the transformation into a sustainable society. We are one of the world's most innovative nations. We have a huge number of innovative, clean tech enterprises and startups. We have a strong tradition of cooperation across borders. Private, public sector, academia, and the civil society. And we also have a political system and an industry that in many ways are spearheading for decarbonization. And I think that's a good point of departure in leading a transformation. Climate change is a cross-border challenge, and cross-border challenges need cross-border solutions, and they in turn require cross-border cooperation and co-creation. And I mean over all kinds of borders. And at COP26 in Glasgow, I think that we hope for much more committed global leadership in addressing the climate change. But I was there, and I think that the progress was good enough, and that we have a good foundation to still increase our cross-border collaboration to make a difference to address the climate change. And I think that these days is all about that, about crossing borders, about matchmaking and networking between the public domain, the private sector, the financial institutions, and many other key stakeholders in the innovative chain. Because it is when people meet that action happens and we can realize our visions and goals. So let me round off by quoting the wise word of the former UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, who said, "We are the first generation that can end poverty and the last that can change climate." So friends, let's be innovative, transformative, and investors of tomorrow's sustainable societies, and together take on the challenge to truly become this first remarkable generation. Thank you so much.
Thank you for launching off this summit. And in any transformation, there are many elephants in the room. And one of the elephants in the room that I thought we might discuss to start the day off is, why Sweden? Why does it matter what Sweden does in the grander scale of things? Darja?
Well, one way to put it is, as Robert put it, we do punch above our weight. So even though we're merely 10 million inhabitants, Brother City from a global perspective, we have a unique width in terms of multinational, internationally leading companies that varies, as I mentioned, from music and retail to fossil-free steel or mobility. That means that when they come together, they have a real opportunity to make major impact. And combining that with a startup ecosystem, I think that there are some unique capabilities. But apparently, that's also why it's so important for us and has always been to do this in collaboration with international partners. Because it's never been about Sweden. It's always been about how can we make an impact in the world. And this time in terms of transformation.
What's your take on that, Robert?
No, I think that what we can show from our history in several political areas, energy not to say the least, is that we actually have implemented a transformation and it works. It's good for the economy, it's good for social perspectives in society, and it's good for the environment. So I think that what we can show, and perhaps, like a test bed, show that you do this transition, it will be good for you, for the whole of society in many aspects, not only from a climate perspective.
And can I add something? So what we are...
It's your show, Darja. Go.
No, but so for instance, what we're seeing now in the north is that industrial leaders are... So 10% of the carbon dioxide emissions globally come from steel production. And this is where leaders in Sweden are now working across industry borders together to drive that kind of transformation. But the impact it's already having on societies should give hope to many. Because I would say that in parts of Sweden that were recently all but forgotten, you now see people taking center stage, speaking very, very proudly of how they're leading this transformation and clearly seeing the opportunities that give themselves. And I think this message cannot be emphasized enough, that it does create hope and opportunities for many when you really start driving this transformative change. And I think in that we also hope to not only inspire, but also bring more people and more actors internationally into this type of collaboration.
Can I ask a follow-up about that? We have this word cloud as well. I don't know if that's going to appear on screen for people to see, but it's got words like Industry 4.0, green industry, recycled materials, and so on. But what I think you're both talking about there is a different kind of society as well. It's not just the technical components of the industry and the data centers that are listed there. There's something else. And Sweden in the 20th century was a good model of that early 20th century growth through society and industry together. Do you see this step change happening maybe in the north as you describe? And then Robert, how would you react to this?
Yeah, I would say that we do. And you mentioned also previous experiences. So first of all, we do have this long tradition of actual collaboration also with civil society, for instance, between public-private civil society in terms of unions. There's a lot of trust there. What we're seeing in this transformation is that it's absolutely essential to bring citizens into these dialogues to actually both create the hope and the opportunities and also to actually realize much of what's being said. And I think we're seeing that happen. And I think in seeing that happening, we're also drawing on other experiences. We were talking about missions earlier and the importance of, making a lot of different stakeholders aligned to ambitious societal outcomes. And we do have such experiences as well. Previously, we had the Zero Vision in terms of public safety in the transport system. That has enabled innovations both within transport, within the roads, but also, leading up to every child wearing helmets when they go to school, and it's had an impact on how you educate children and more. So I think that we have many of these types of experiences. So we are well aware of both the value and importance of setting these ambitious common goals and working together and bringing not only academia, industry, startups, but also, for instance, citizens through civil society into these processes.
That's
very
good to
important.
hear. And Robert, from your point of view, from an energy agency point of view, energy for some time has sort of been the infrastructure that quietly hums away in the background and powers things without us thinking about it too consciously. You have to think about it. But do you see this transformation happening as well in the way that Darja just described, where we became aware of road safety and we transformed the system accordingly? How do you engage citizens around the idea of energy transformation in that way?
Well, I think that it's happening as we speak. I mean, we are moving away from a very centralized, large-scale energy production system where you just on your light switch, so to say, at the home, and there's light, to becoming a much more democratic issue today, individualized, personalized, where you can choose what kind of energy profile you want to have, how you will, and I think that is happening with a lot of new innovations that make this possible. And you have digitalization, electrification. But one thing that I'd like to emphasize that I think is so important if we are to punch above our weight class is that we become much better storytellers of the benefits from a broad societal perspective of making this transformation into a sustainable society. Because a digitalized, electrified society will be a smarter society, a better society in so many aspects. So I think that if we can become those storytellers, we have all the possibilities in the world of exporting our solutions.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Daria. Setting the scene, giving us context. Dan and I now know what we need to do for the next few hours. So we sense the sense of urgency in that. And thank you for storytelling, which gives us a great bridge into the next session for today. Because what are the key activities in this transformation? Or a few of the key activities. Recycle, upcycle, and reuse. So listen to how a small municipality on the west coast of Sweden started a marine recycling center for discarded fishing gear and the work towards recycling, upcycling and reuse of these materials. Please, roll the film.
As soon as plastic reaches the sea, it becomes a silent killer, and this is something we all need to understand. All over the world, the seas are facing global environmental stress, and the west coast of Sweden, where I come from, is one of the most littered areas in Europe. The North Sea and its inhabitants are being destroyed by us humans as we carelessly leaving waste behind. We're acting like we have more than one planet. In my work as a photojournalist, I've seen plastic stuck in stomachs in many animals, as well as birds and fish being trapped underwater in ghost nests and other fishing tools left at sea. It is commonly known that if we don't do anything now, it will be more plastic than fish in the sea by 2050. But unfortunately, what I've seen and heard, we're already there. It is just so heartbreaking. Therefore, I made it my mission to increase awareness of harm and consequences of our behavior. We really must start to understand that we need to take much better care of the most important thing we have, our planet. Without a healthy living sea, civilization will cease to exist as we know it.
In Sotenäs, Sweden, the first marine recycling centre has been established. Here, anyone can hand in waste and old fishing gear to be reused, recycled and upcycled. In connection to the recycling centre, the municipality has created a testbed for marine waste where companies, startups and innovators can test and develop new products and inventions from ocean plastics. The recycling centre is unique and was born from the necessity to do something about the enormous amounts of marine debris and to find a way to contribute to a circular economy. The local fishermen, having seen the effects of marine debris on the seafood industry firsthand, and with their enthusiasm to make a difference, have been a part of the process of building up this facility from the very beginning. Additionally, a nationwide service called Fiskereturen, where fishermen can gather and leave their used gear and fishing nets, has been established.
We believe that we have to do what we can to try and create a more sustainable future and contribute to cleaning and restoring our oceans of the marine pollution. So here at the Sotenäs Marine Recycling Centre, once the facility was established and we had a collection and sorting system up and running, a natural question occurred, which is what is the best thing that we can do with this material? And how can we turn it into a valuable resource instead of seeing it as just waste? As designers and as consumers of these products, it's important to think about the life cycle of the products and how these choices can impact our lifestyle and our planet.
Within the test bed, the beach plastics and fishing gear are ground down into smaller pieces, creating a new raw material ready for experimentation and innovation. In collaboration with RISE, tests and analyses are done to certify that the plastics are suitable for new products. Examples of applications that have already been tested are injection molding, compression molding, and 3D printing. The companies that join forces with the Recycling Centre receive support all the way from the development of a concept through to production. Having the same values in relation to environment, climate change and sustainability are key factors for a successful collaboration. To make recycling easier in the future, a study on how to enhance the design of new fishing gear has been initiated. Circular design ideology is implemented so that producers can easily grasp the required measures to take into consideration at an early stage of the design process in order to contribute to a more sustainable future and to strengthen the importance of a circular economy from the very start.
We're also developing a method to track and trace the material all the way from its origin point to becoming a new product. This means that the consumer will be able to see the history of the material, all the way perhaps from the specific beach that it was collected from, or the specific fishing boat where the nets were used, and then all the way into the product in their hands. We also hope that each product created from this material will include what to do with it at the end of its life cycle in order for it to be recycled again. By illustrating this transparent value chain, we can really see all of the steps involved from creating this product. And that's the way that we can check if the product is going to be sustainable and if it's contributing to a circular economy. Creating this awareness for consumers is important in order to create more sustainable lifestyle choices.
This fascinating research and innovation began in 2018 and really is one of a kind. With the Recycling Centre and innovative marine testbed, the municipality of Sotenäs is breaking new ground by reinventing the whole ecosystem of recycling and reusing plastic, ghost nets and marine debris. It takes creative minds and strategies to carry out new initiatives, but most of all, it takes courage, positivity and a lot of support to lead change. Thanks to the bold and knowledgeable driving spirit at Symbioscentrum in Sotenäs, Sweden continues to be a strong leader in development of sustainable ideas. It feels great to know that through this work, Sweden is making a difference for the environment, but more importantly, for the survival of our planet. I hope that this initiative can be a source of inspiration.
Thank you. Inspiring indeed. And I'd like to welcome Joakim Odelberg, the film and photojournalist and TV host of One Planet Production, and Maria Pettersson, the project leader for the testbed marine waste in Sotenäs municipality. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. Joakim, could you tell us about the film, how it started and your work?
I've been working with marine debris and focus on lost fishing gears, ghost nets since 2007. And when we heard about this project, I got really, really interested. And, you know, I wanted to be a part of it. And luckily, they took me in.
And Maria, from your point of view, tell us about the recycling center and the test bed and the work that you've done.
Yeah, it's a very nice work to be a part of. I'm a project leader for the testbed marine waste, and we have 12 companies involved in the project, learning what can be done with these recycled materials. And we can provide a small maker space and lab and tests at RISE, Sweden's Research Institute. And we're coaching into circular design because we don't want to be part of the problem later on.
I think that sounds like a very good ambition, not being part of the problem. Could you tell us the difference between recycling and upcycling? I think from a mainstream point of view, we hear a lot about recycling, but what's the difference to upcycle?
When we talk about upcycle, we see that as products that can be used as they are. For instance, you could see in the movie a company in the testbed are using nets as it is for fashion. We can also sell products in secondhand stores, in our local secondhand store in Sotenäs. Also reuse products again in the fishing industry.
And Joachim, you've been following this for a while now, and during the film, and clearly you have a personal interest in the topic as well. This is a test bed, indicating that this is on a small scale so far, identifying the opportunities. As a storyteller, as Robert was saying, the importance of building stories. How do we take this test bed and make it the new normal? I don't want this to be a sensational story in a year's time, but normal. How do we do that?
Yeah, it's a good question, but I think that I will keep on doing what I'm doing and that I know that I'm good at to inspire, to raise awareness about this problem, because plastic pollution is a problem all over the world, in the deepest abysses, on the highest peaks, everywhere we have a problem with marine, with plastics. And I think that, you know, this project can be a role model to the rest of the world, and foremost in developing countries. I've been working a lot in Southeast Asia, and they are in need of a project like this. And I think when marine debris suddenly becomes a resource and not only waste, and you can earn money on marine waste, I think you can start to create a circular economy around the world in small scale and build from there. And it can become, you know, work opportunity. Yeah, fantastic project.
I think you're identifying one of the key aspects of several of the challenges that we will be addressing over the next 4 years, and that is making it profitable, earning money, as you said. How important is that to demonstrate early on in this type of testbed that it is financially sustainable as well as planetary?
We hope that we can come to that point that we actually can break even, at least. Now we sort everything manually because it's complex fractions, and so we need to work a lot more with a circular business model, but we think we are there later on.
Well, I'll take that as a vote of confidence that we're going to get there. And we have a question from the audience, someone that has a question for you. Please join us, tell us your name and your question.
Hello, my name is Örjan Jansson. I work for WWF, where we have a program to support very good innovations and try to help them scale up. And I have to congratulate you, Maria and Joachim, about this really good work. And my question is, what is your strategy to involve more countries in this initiative, and how can you invite other municipalities around the globe to learn from this work?
Shall I start or?
Please.
Yes. Okay, we want to be transparent in what we are doing and share our knowledge. We receive visits at the center from other municipalities, schools, companies, and from the public. And we are involved in different types of projects, both nationally and internationally. For instance, we are part of one upcoming EU legislation for end user responsibility that will come into force 2025. And we also have a vision of being a flagship for innovation and knowledge, since we are working with the whole value chain, from collecting, sorting, recycling, and to designing new circular products. So we hope that will happen.
Yeah, and as I said before there, Örjan, I'm going to keep on doing what I'm doing. I'm going to keep to create stories, content, inspire people, raise awareness. But I also work hands-on, and I've been working now for a few years down in Indonesia and Sumatra, partly about marine debris and plastic waste. And it's a huge, massive problem down there. And I think that if we can get those projects running in those countries, it will help the planet in the future. And that's, to me, is really, really, essential and important.
Örjan, you feel happy with that answer?
Very happy. Thank you very much.
What are you guys doing at the WWF?
Oh, we do a lot of things. I'm running a program which is called Climate Innovations. So we try to actually support companies and municipalities to understand what actions do they need to take, and try to pull in new innovations that can help them. So this is a newly started program, so we are not fully up and running yet. But that is one thing we are doing that is very close to this work. So I try to learn as much as all the good innovations that are available. We want to know about them, and we try to bring them into where they are needed, basically.
Well, thank you for joining us. Thank you, Joachim and Maria. Thank you for creating, obviously, this testbed and this initiative, and seeing what is possible, identifying a challenge, using the new buzzwords of this transformation, recycling, upcycling, and reuse, and making that tangible for people to understand. And hopefully, this will be part of the new normal. And I look forward to hearing how this spreads across the world. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And as we can hear, silos and breaking silos of old thinking patterns in the innovation community urges us to think in terms of missions. I think that will be one of the main themes of today. This is, for many, a completely new practice. So there's a pressing need to learn more about what missions are and how to do them. And with us, to help us understand, it's a great honor to introduce to you Rowan Conway, Policy Fellow and Head of IIPP's Mission-Oriented Innovation Network. Rowan Conway, thank you for joining us. Thank you for sharing your story and your work about how to design missions.
Hello, I'm assuming I'm now on because I've just joined the room. Yes, I can see myself there too. Hello. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to go through this work and follow what an exciting and inspiring project that was just shown.
Floor is yours, Rowan.
Sorry, say that again. I've lost you. Oh, there we go. Okay, hopefully everyone can hear me, and I'm just going to say, head over to the next slide. I am Rowan Conway. I am the head of the Mission Oriented Innovation Network at the UCL Institute for Innovation and Public Purpose. And I work very closely with Professor Mariana Mazzucato on the particular issue of mission oriented innovation. And what I'm going to talk to you about now is really how missions have evolved from, if you like, the early technical approach, which if you like, inspired the moonshot. But the moonshot is quite a useful way of thinking because missions have been used to inspire and direct action throughout history. And we saw quite a number of technical missions from the 1960s on, from the NASA's Apollo mission to put a man on the moon. But now we're moving into an era of considerable social challenges and perhaps more wicked challenges than the space race. These kinds of challenges require a different kind of attention. They, as we've heard earlier from the speakers who have already joined us, they require a collaboration between civil society, the innovation system, and with policy and with actors such as businesses and citizens. Next slide, please. And I think in terms of policy, since 2015, we've seen enormous progress towards a greater mission orientation, explicitly in climate strategy and political strategy. And you're specifically seeing that in Nordic economy. So this is from the Denmark Climate Change Manifesto in 2020, where it says the climate challenge is one of the greatest global challenges of our time. The Paris Agreement and the UN Sustainable Development Goals reach a global consensus on the need for change course to avoid a major rise in global temperatures and the irreparable damage such as that increase would cause. Yet efforts to translate these goals into actions have been insufficient. Next slide, please. So the work that we have been doing is really trying to understand, building on the work of Mariana Mazzucato and her original work around the entrepreneurial state and the role that the state plays in innovation and enabling an innovation economy to rise to greater challenges. And most recently in her book, Mission Economy, we've started thinking about how to reimagine what we call the direction of growth. Next slide, please. What Mariana would say is that growth needs a direction as well as a rate. Competition-driven innovation and just driving for export-led growth can be somewhat directionless. And at IPP, we look at how government actors around the world should actually be priming the innovation ecosystem to act as value creators, recognizing that value today currently is dictated by market ideals of efficiency, speed, cost reduction, but also fast returns. And I've heard that a little bit from some of the introductions earlier. How do we make this financially sustainable was something that someone said. So we need to recognize that financial and profitable innovation is something that we're all looking for, that there can be this twin goal of growth, but that ultimately the way that we look at innovation may need to think about long-term value creation. And so patient finance and alternative evaluation metrics will also need to be covered. So we think in the Institute about public value and mission-oriented innovation. We think about market shaping and the role that governments actually need to play instead of fixing market failures and correcting negative market externalities like cleaning up the oceans. There needs to be a way to actively co-create green markets like the things that we saw earlier. And then ways to think about beyond static cost benefit analysis to fast appraisals of projects. We need more dynamic metrics that can see value created over time. Next slide, please. And this requires new governance and new capabilities, and that's across the entire innovation chain. The innovation ecosystem encompasses the macro environment, it encompasses the regime, the policy, the investment mores and norms, but then it also the meso environment, which is the institutions who will be ultimately delivering and receiving investment and early stage investment from government, and then also the microenvironment, so the ventures and then the civic behaviors that we're asking people to actually change to undertake. So this requires that we all start seeing our role differently as part of a mission-oriented innovation ecosystem, and how we think about selecting our missions is important, how we have adaptability through portfolio approaches, and how we think about directing public finances, not just as a copy and paste version of private finances, but the ways that we can think in alternative ways that might crowd in private investment. Next slide, please. And we've been tracking at the Institute the shift towards mission-oriented innovation policy. And in the last slide, I actually showed a cover of the governing missions in the European Union policy framework, which Mariana wrote in 2018 and has informed EU innovation policy quite strongly. And we see this also in policy adoption, and the direction of public finance, and specifically public investment finance in R&D. So you see that the European Union is very, very advanced in its adoption of mission-oriented, at least strategy and policy. And then, as we see, we'll start to see whole ecosystems shifting towards the delivery. And you know, an example given with the plastics, the circular plastics economy that you showed earlier, is the kind of example of the kind of projects that you start seeing coming out of mission-oriented innovation in the EU. Next slide, please. So the Mission-Oriented Innovation Network is it actually now has 100 public agencies around the world, and we bring together leading global policymaking institutions to share the challenges and opportunities when trying to create this public value via innovation. Next slide, please. And this is a very heterodox group of people, or heterogeneous group of people. This is both city level organizations, it's institutional level organizations like the BBC or the Design Council, and also innovation agencies like Vinnova in Sweden, but also a wide range of innovation agencies around the world, but also at that departmental, government departmental and banking, central banking finance level. So we bring together these different agencies to try and understand what is the kind of ecosystem you need to cultivate to really think about delivery of mission-oriented innovation. Next slide, please. Because it is a multi-actor game, if you like, the delivery of mission-oriented innovation. It is the process of setting the political agenda and making it very clear what the goals are, so that the translation between a grand challenge through to a mission and clarity in that mission enables you to start thinking about what does cross-sectoral innovation look like here, and then engage with the sort of bottom-up portfolio of projects and experimentation that's needed in order to really deliver against a program of change. And we've seen the EU itself has set out its 5 major missions that are really trying to tackle this top-down and bottom-up approach. Next slide, please. Now, it's very important to really understand that this is quite a new direction on policy. And as it matures, we're starting to see key challenges that face the mission-oriented innovation policy landscape. I'd say the first one is not thinking that we need to think about innovation differently, but that we can just point it towards a direction and that the system won't need to change around it, which I think is somewhat misguided. You know, if you take an evolutionary economics approach, we are always thinking that technology builds on technology. And I think this slide suggests the same. If you think this slide, I don't know if it's terribly blurry. I hope it's not. I hope it's not. But this slide actually illustrates that at the evolution of innovation policies since World War II was that it started with science-driven development and funding for basic research, which was seeing a failure and, you know, taking on market failure as the driver for innovation. But then as economies developed post-war and then the scope and nature of government changed, you've seen a series of waves of different kinds of emphasis of what innovation policy is trying to do. So moving through an emphasis on technology promotion and key technology. So that's when you started seeing things like smart specialization, regions that really specialized in particular technology development, Silicon Valley, for example, you know, emerging out of relatively closed ecosystems or technology-based ecosystems growing up around them. Then you started seeing through a variety of economic shocks, the emphasis on market forces and the modernization of the system. So, you know, driving toward innovation towards competition has been a greater push since the 90s. And then over what we've seen since sort of 2010, as this societal missions have become more clear, the UN Sustainable Development Goals have become more clear, the scientific consensus around climate change has gone into sharp relief. We've started to recognize that we need to try and bring innovation into tackling the urgency of societal problems. The reality, though, is that if you go to the next slide, that these are actually quite profoundly different ways of thinking about innovation. Because it's not a simple pivot, if you like, from just simple, it's not simple technology or traditional innovation policy, which is somewhat benign in its in its interventionist approach from government. But its justification was, effectively government's role was to intervene. Intervention is aimed at modernizing the system, but without substantive direction. Government doesn't tell you what to do. It recognizes that the market, or believes that the market, will act in the best interest for growth, and innovation policy is economic policy. That effectively means that the results that you're looking back are return on investment. And that sharp return on investment, or what was described as financial sustainability earlier, becomes a watchword for whether something's doing well or not, whether you kind of pivot away or you continue to invest. Unfortunately, that drives you towards faster-paced faster-paced innovation ecosystems. So where there's strong market pull, it tends to be where this kind of benign competition-oriented innovation policy goes to. Mission-oriented innovation policy, on the other hand, is interventions that target transformative change. You cannot overlay that same requirement, because you may have a lot of space between world demand, market, the need, the supply need, and then the market demand, because it may not be a market at all, and it may need considerable shaping. So, for example, what you were showing there with plastics, understanding what your market is beyond niche, high income, or high price, bespoke, really nice, material things, but ultimately that's a very small market. So what is it to turn that waste stream into a value stream? That could take considerably more investment from government to actually really think about that. And that there's a lot you could learn from how long it actually took for Denmark to create its green energy ecosystem, because that's been going for many decades. It's not something that has just happened overnight based on mission-oriented innovation policy now. So actually how much investment is needed for the long-term returns is something that needs to be thought of here. So understanding the key difference between mission-oriented innovation policy and competition-oriented policy is really important, because mission-oriented policy puts solving the problem in the foreground and making the profit something that's required, but it's not in the driving seat. So you need to have the financial ecosystem that enables that. If you go to the next slide, please, and this is my last slide. The challenge is not just a simple challenge to rate net zero. And this slide really exemplifies what I have just been talking about where competition-oriented traditional innovation policy really stays at the top end of this innovation illustration. So this is from Michael Grubb, who wrote Planetary Economics in 2014, recognizing that tackling the challenges of the 21st century is not a single journey to net zero, and innovation won't all be simple disruptive technology innovations that will disrupt incumbent markets and then simply take over it, like the move to electrification of cars. That there is considerable diversification, complexity in the system that will be required to have innovation across the piece. So again, this may not be the most high resolution, but if you see that at the top of this, the top one here is where we're very used to what innovation looks like. It's highly innovating, close connection with consumers and innovators. And this is where you see fast return on investment. And innovation happens in the middle. Sometimes that's called the valley of death, and it's the enabling it to be turned into consumer-based products. When you start seeing the more challenging environments, and when you're talking about things that we saw about earlier about the circular economy, you will be in a more challenging environment, whether that be the middle one or the bottom one, where moderate innovation, where effectively there's very little business to business connectivity, and you've got low R&D intensity. So effectively this might be product engineering or industrial engineering. How are you going to change shipping, for example? Is there a massive market pull to do this? Well, if I'm in shipping and it's going to cost me a lot of money, probably not. So where's the push that's going to make this happen? And then you get into the low innovation spaces. So that might be things like energy and construction, or embodied carbon load in steel, or embodied issues of waste of aggregate. There's very little innovation that's driven by the technology push or the market pull there. No one wants to pay more money. In fact, they want to pay less money for production, and they want to derive some kind of return. So there becomes this very large technology valley of death. So it's navigating what innovation looks like for mission-oriented innovation, which will be the real challenge going forward in the innovation economy. There will be quite a lot of stuff that it is in that top line. I'm trying not to be the voice of doom because it's all very exciting moving into mission-oriented innovation. And many of the things that you'll be looking at will be highly innovating, close connection, high-tech solutions. But you have to be able to look across the piece and enable that kind of things that need a lot more support, if you like, to go from low innovation and little connection between innovators and markets right through to the market shaping that needs to happen, and that be through innovation agencies, through the EU, through various other points of leadership that take you to new markets that will enable mission-oriented innovation. So I will stop there, knowing that I have to finish. Oh, there's my timer telling me to stop. And I'm coming back, I think, later to sit on a panel and talk a little bit about where it's happening in practice. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron, and thank you for that, establishing what is the mission innovation. And if I try to read between the lines, there were several aspects of why this is a wicked challenge ahead. But one of the key aspects is reprioritizing the why versus the financial impact. And you left a few things hanging in terms of how that will happen and how that will manifest. Luckily, you'll be coming back to the panel later, and I will be asking both of you how will these mission innovations succeed, given that we have a bit of a conflict of goals where the financials come in? I'll see you later on, and now you can prepare for that question as well, Dad.
Thank you.
And we will move on to Blekinge, which is a region on a mission. How can a small and remote region far away from urbanism and financial muscles turn those factors into advantages? Please roll the film.
Blekinge struggles with an image of being a small and remote region, away from urbanism and financial flows. We do have a great surrounding nature, a beautiful archipelago, and some very future-oriented people, companies, and organizations. So we thought, why not actually turn it around? What if our size, our remoteness, and our closeness to nature could actually be an advantage? And this is where the road towards becoming a region on a mission began. Basically, what we do is we mobilize the knowledge we have within our smart specialization areas across sectors in Blekinge and apply this to suitable missions appointed by the EU. For example, healthy oceans and water. So for us, our remoteness is not a bad thing. It gives us a head start in involving all sectors in society to quickly test new solutions.
NKT connects a greener world. Mission-oriented innovation will support us to enhance our motto. We want to leave the ocean in a better state than when we came. One example is that we in our offshore operations start with cleaning the route from old fish nets and other debris. At NKT, we manufacture and install cable systems offshore that, for example, connect offshore wind farms or connect different countries to be able to trade energy. For us, it's all about the co-benefits. We want to sharpen our business model, experiment on new innovations like connecting renewable energy to our onshore grids, and at the same time, we help solving the present challenges to our seas and waters. This is also an opportunity to make contact with customers, with partners, and stakeholders with the same mission as us.
Sculpture is a small company working with large-scale additive manufacturing and circular economy. Our goal is to put value into old trash like car bumpers or like this old fishing net. So our vision is to create a network of 3D printing hubs. And the benefit of that is to cut transportation. So the only thing we will transport is digital files, creating value out of the local waste.
To put research into practice is a key factor in our development. Therefore, we have a close cooperation with regional Blekinge Institute of Technology.
BTH focuses on digitalization and sustainability, and it's in our DNA to work very closely with both public and private sector partners to transform society. Considering the profile of our university, the industrial ecosystem in the region, and the geographic context, I think we have perfect opportunities to become a testbed where actors from all over the world can come and test and demonstrate new innovative solutions to grand challenges.
To involve citizens is also an important aspect of mission-oriented innovation.
The oceans we share are oceans with stories from the past, now and in future. The state of the ocean has and will have a great impact on conflict and war, collaboration and peace. These are the stories that the Naval Museum tells.
Therefore, the Naval Museum is an excellent platform to engage citizens in taking action to make the Baltic a more healthy sea.
I think that the ocean is very important for all citizens of Blekinge, and I think that everyone wants to contribute to protecting the oceans.
Eriksberg is not only one of Northern Europe's largest protected areas for wildlife, but also function as a testbed and innovation hub.
Just behind us here we have the mussel farm. So they want to investigate if it's possible to breed up mussels. So we work with a lot of things to learn more for the future. We hope that more research people come to Eriksberg and see all the biodiversity we have been created here for 80 years. And we are very hopeful to get even more people to learn the nature and how it works.
So our size is also an asset when we move into an innovation development that emphasizes design and experiments a lot more. So our goal is to be a European demo region in this field, so that our know-how and methods can replicate to other regions, so that we really can make an impact.
How inspiring again. And I've recently become aware of Blekinge as a hotspot for impactful missions and amazingly dedicated and humble people. A shout out to their wetlands that are being created at the moment. They are walking the walk, so to speak. Dan, I have a question for you though. So all over Sweden and internationally, we see these amazing initiatives locally being built. How do we give them a voice and a platform for this to cross-pollinate?
I think it's so interesting when you just saw that amazing film as well. The power of the action is because it's local. You know, there's a real relationship between those people, the history of the place, the landscape, the environment, all of those systems. And yet we're increasingly understanding all of these systems are connected. And so this is what your question is about. How do we get what's happening in Blekinge to these other regions? How do they start working together in collaboration, almost at the scale of watersheds? And a lot of our political boundaries of those regions are sort of ad hoc now to some extent. Sometimes they relate to some natural system, but often they're a political boundary. So we have this big challenge now, and we as Vinnova and the other agencies have to figure out how to be the cement between the bricks here, how to help Blekinge do what it's doing, but then also pull the learning out. We can't ask them to do that necessarily to solve other regions' problems, but recognize that they're connected. It means new platforms, new types of communication, incentivizing them to communicate super well, so make the kind of media that we were just talking about and those kind of stories. But we also have to figure out, again, this next level now. How do we work as a system, not just a set of disconnected regions?
You highlighted two challenges. One is how do we ask them to solve other localities' problems, and how do we ask them to become storytellers when they are clearly passionate about something else? And the other challenge is, how do you find them?
Well, if they're good storytellers, they find you. So again, this is partly why we do days like today as well, partly why that kind of film is made, is that it enables them to be able to tell us that story. But of course, we do a lot of work increasingly, kind of stepping out of our office here in the middle of Stockholm and being as local as possible, going to places, asking people, running workshops, having seminars, symposia and other things, and saying what's happening here with energy or health or mobility or food or whatever. So it's partly on us as an agency to be detectives and find out what's happening across the country as well.
Dan, the detective. Well, Vinnova, you've got a lot of work on your plate, and hopefully this inspires some people to raise their hand and talk about what they're doing. So use the chat or use our hashtag in LinkedIn. And soon we're going to ask a Gapminder quiz. There we go. We have a Gapminder quiz for the audience. You have had the possibility to use the QR code or menti.com. We have the code on the screen now, and answer some questions to see how knowledgeable you are about structural systems that are relevant for today's topics. First question is, I love when I'm given a clicker and it doesn't work. How much of the excess heat from global warming is captured by the oceans? Did you know the answer to this one, Dan?
I had a sneak preview of the answer, so I'm not going to cheat.
So we know what you guys have been answering. So the choices are 10%, 50%, or 90%. And alarmingly, most of you thought that around 10% of excess heat from global warming is captured in the oceans. Drum roll. What is the right answer, Dan?
I believe it's 90%, right?
It's 90%.
Yeah.
Our oceans are important.
Incredibly important. And again, it goes back a little bit to the previous comment that we were just talking about, how we've run oceans as if they were sort of separate entities in the past. This bit is Swedish, this bit is Norwegian, this bit is British or whatever. And of course, they're all absolutely connected systems. There is effectively one ocean, and that isn't how we manage it. And so we have all of these massive now global issues falling onto a global system, oceans and water, and yet we've tended to break those down into small packets of you look after this bit, I'll look after this bit. Occasionally we'll meet every now and then and have an international summit about oceans. So we need, again, a kind of a system change in terms of understanding these are absolutely fundamentally interconnected systems. This means a new spirit of collaboration, not competition in that sense. We can't really compete over water when it's as scarce as this and it's working in the way that you just described.
And is it important or problematic that an audience that clearly is interested in this topic gets the answer fundamentally wrong and thinks that only 10% of excess heat? Or is it about the people that are interested in water and the summits that you're talking about?
Yeah, good question. I mean, the question for me is, then what? You know, once you've understood that, because we could just email everybody in the country and say the answer is 90%, by the way.
That's a great suggestion.
Well, perhaps, but we have a long list of questions and answers like this to get through in that sense. But then what? You know, and so how do we then motivate a deeper engagement beyond the data? That would be interesting. So, you know, how do we work with people's everyday understanding of water systems, where they come from? If you live by the sea, you probably have a reasonable relationship with these things, but you may never thought about this global heat capacity that it has. So I'm kind of more interested in, okay, we understand that number, great. There's lots of numbers around us. How does that translate into meaningful insight for me in terms of my everyday life? What would I do about that? What would it mean to me? And I don't mean just as a consumer. I mean as a citizen, as a voter, as a member of a community. That's what would be really interesting, I think.
And let's conceptually leave that hanging, but keep it as a thread for the rest of the day. Because we'd now like to move on to a topic that is close to your heart as well, Dan, which is missions and global transformations to a fossil-free, sustainable, fair world, and halting mass extinction of biodiversity on Earth is, as we know, daunting, scary, frustrating, as well as an opportunity. And one of the things I personally find challenging in this work, and I know many share with me, including our next speaker, is that sometimes the media or excited business leaders and politicians sees this transformation first and foremost as a business opportunity. And as Rowan was saying, we need to reprioritize the why before the profitability. And though great wealth will be created through rebuilding society, new energy systems, new infrastructure, etc., every aspect of this transformation won't be profitable, period. And most importantly, we don't have a choice. We need to get cracking, profitable or not, expensive or not, achievable or not. And a conference like this will and should highlight the positive momentum, the amazing innovation, and as our minister said this morning or earlier today, pioneering the possible. But let's also spell out what is on the line and why progress is still snail-paced. I'd like to welcome Danny Bangery, Director and Founder of Stanford Change Labs, to talk about why systems transformation and system design concepts are necessary to address complex and large-scale challenges. Banny, welcome to today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. I'm waiting for my slides to be up. Perhaps, there we go. Thank you for having me. I think we are all here with the shared concern about the future of our planet, and it is an existential threat. And I think we all recognize that. And I think the question is, how do we get out of the chasm that we've fallen into, or rather with the precipice that we are racing towards? What I would like to frame this problem is that while there are a whole lot of global challenges, I think we need to have a focus on the ones that would render everything else moot. And if we can have a mnemonic, there are three. In my mind, there are three things that are happening that need attention in their own way towards them. One doesn't necessarily solve the other. The first aspect is the fact that we are operating as a civilization where we are a force unto itself, and our consumption patterns are causing an extraction rate to be far faster than the recharge rates. And unless we change that equation, we might save some energy here, or we might turn a city into something that's greener, but the equation isn't changed. Meanwhile, we are in the midst of a mass extinction that we haven't seen since the dinosaurs went extinct. And these species are very important. The ecological balance is extremely important to the stability of the biosphere. And of course, the climate crisis, which is already showing its teeth, and there is no doubt that these three are deeply connected, but also need attention in a way that is very directed and transformative. Now, let's remind ourselves where we are. While we are going about doing our businesses and we are looking at, we are all doing our workshops and so on, 4 of the 9 planetary boundaries have been crossed, and we don't quite know what the safe levels for the others are. And these are planetary boundaries to maintain a safe operating space for humanity. And so the one thing that I would like to underscore is urgency. There are many aspects to this problem, but if we have to look at our own actions for the last decade or last 5 years and ask ourselves, how much have we actually changed anything? And the answer is not enough. It is an open-ended effort. We are doing a whole lot, but we are not calculating the impact of our own efforts. And this is not how one does even a much simpler problem, leave alone trying to harness the forces that are sending our planet into a trajectory that is highly undesirable. Now, this is the fact that we are trying to match innovation processes with the class of challenge, because we have innovation processes. It's just that they're not fit for purpose. I think that we need to frame the problem in the way such that we can actually design the innovation approaches that are appropriate. And where we are and where we are headed is very distinct from where we need to be. And there's a very profound gap. But it's not just that the outcomes are different. I think what the thing to stress upon is that it's not just a future consequences, it's also a future facing of causality. It's not just where we are, it is what we are that is causing us to head where we are headed, where we are projected to head. So if we need to be somewhere else, we also need to change who we are and how we are operating. And that means that the system that we are is turning when we look at it in terms of a planetary boundary condition, the system is losing stability very, very quickly. And so we need to change the trajectory. And I think this is what is we need to really grasp, that if we don't change the way we are operating, we might change some outcomes in isolated ways, but we don't really yield the ability to shift the trajectory itself. And so if we look at how our innovation methodologies have gone, and we came out from the consumption economy where a whole lot of innovation was about designing for consumption and creating an economy that was based on consumption. And on top of that, without really changing the consumption patterns, we layered on many different types of innovation. And in the design world, we came up with design thinking, which I feel a little culpable about because I had something to do with it. The human-centered design, UX, etc. And this is the era in which the market cap of Apple exceeded that of ExxonMobil. And we also, in the realm of technologies, we've created many nonlinear technologies that are just as profound as flight or the internal combustion engine, but they're largely uncontrolled. And we are essentially hoping that they do more good than bad, but we don't have the ways to really harness them in a way that we can ensure that. So now if we say that we are embarking on a new era where we need to operate differently, I think Dan was mentioning it as well, that we really, really need to figure out how to innovate at the level of systems and transform things at the level of systems. But because time is not on our side and our problems are not necessarily linear, they're non-linear, they're exponential, we also need to chase them with models and platforms that are non-linear. Otherwise, we are guaranteed to get outpaced. So this is a complicated slide, apologize. But what we are looking at is that the current form, the bottom of the screen, the current form of innovation is still locked in the paradigms that was of the definition of progress that was laid down in the Industrial Revolution and before. And so the changes that we make to innovation bring us the current forms of progress, however we frame them, but they come deeply coupled with the global challenges, the fact that our system is, and that is the definition of the Anthropocene. So if we are to go towards a different future, and I'm just calling it, the terminology I'm using is intergenerational well-being, where both the short term and the long term are not allowed to work against each other, but they're working in collaboration, in which case we actually need to consider an innovation space that is sufficiently different from how we operate right now, such that we actually are able to get outcomes that are sufficiently different. And I don't think that while we recognize that we need to change our organizational system and thinking and so on, and structural aspects and so on, I don't think we can wait for the institutions to change before we embark on the action. It is the innovation space that has to simultaneously bring about the new institutions in terms of the new, really transformative propositions that we learn how to create. And so this innovation space too is what we are meeting about. And so what I'd like to do is I'd like to share some of the insights that have come out of the work that we do at Change Labs. And we've, over the last 10 or a little bit more, we've come up with methodologies, and it's come to be known as systems acupuncture. And this is essentially referring to the fact that brute force methods are not an option. We need to be very, very strategic and action oriented, and where the things that we can do must count for the changes, and need to be strict about asking ourselves whether or not we are going to actually make a difference. But in the real world, who is going to do it and how do we go about how do we go about creating propositions that are transformative enough? And so there's a lot of work that's been done on these methodologies. But what one thing there are some subtle shifts and there are some methodological approaches that are quite distinct. But one of them is that we are no longer talking about human-centered. It is the anthropocentrism that has got us into trouble. So the boundary condition is the planet, and we need to think in terms of that. And innovation is essentially not just coming up with something new, but it's outperforming the normative by a very, very large margin and bringing about system level transformation and aspiring for resilient system trajectories. So if from a little bit about systems acupuncture, this is at the nexus of not just innovation, but also a new kind of leadership, which is essentially creates the ecosystem for this kind of change, which Vinnova is exhibiting. But it also, it is moot unless it turns into action. And I underscore the need for urgency, right? Now, a few principles from the world of systems acupuncture that might be useful, because these come from a kind of a theoretical frame, but it has come from all the applied work that we've been doing with agencies, with countries, with the UN, with private sector organizations, etc. But these are in a sense extracted out from our work. So first and foremost, unless we reframe success and we commit to end-to-end mitigation of our complex planetary level crisis, it is extremely hopeful to imagine that a group of people will self-assemble or the human species will have collective altruism in order to really speak to the large scale. We absolutely need to internalize the future states. Currently, they're externalized in our institutions and our organizations, and we need to internalize them. And as Dan was saying, I don't think that this, like what we're seeing is that these systems problems are completely, it depends on coming at it from different sides and using the cross-disciplinary parallax in order to even figure out what it is. But in terms of the action, it doesn't fall neatly into any single agency space. So we need to create the means by which we really need to reduce and reduce the transaction cost to come about where agencies in different sectors are working together. So those platforms are really become very important. And then the fact that you can't just bring people together and expect them to come up with a transformative proposition that is really going to change the needle, like move the needle. And that's like, asking someone to design the Ferrari just by coming together or some such thing. You need processes. And these processes are actually possible to incorporate, and it doesn't take PhDs and so on. We do this all the time, but there is process distinction in how this is done, and that we need to drive towards that duality, transformative yet realistic and actionable. Now, a lot of our emphasis has been reactive and saying, let's just go to a zero footprint for our own organization, or let's go towards changing the boundary conditions of how people behave in a city and so on. But I think what we also need to do is having a systems-based theory of success that includes many different things: theory of scaling, theory of failure avoidance, and also seeing it, how is it going to get resourced? How is it going to get scaled? Who is going to actually participate and why? And how is this trajectory going to be amplified and sustained? So these are questions that all need to be on the innovation table. And so it's an end-to-end strategy that we need to be thinking in terms of. But because these are difficult to do given our current organizational and institutional structures, we actually need to think in terms of new organizational structures in order to cater to this kind of work. And so simultaneously, as we are coming up with solutions, we are also changing our own organization and how we're working. Now, as we it's really important in this ability to innovate at the system level, because the normative organization doesn't make much room for it. it doesn't allow us to work in systems. There are many impedances. So there's a new capacity at different levels, not just at the human level, at the individual level, but also at the organizational level. And I think that because the scale is massive, bespoke tiny projects do not necessarily add up to the scale that we really need to speak in terms of. So we are thinking in terms of borrowing the nonlinearity of platform models and creating ecosystem where one can harness the existing forces and using it towards these kind of outcomes and creating win-win options. So not only policy, but also creating the market forces to essentially create a market around this kind of transformation. And I think this is something that we like to avoid speaking about, which is that the transition to a different kind of economy is not without a tremendous amount of resources. And there aren't sufficient resources flowing to where they need to. And when there is an impedance mismatch between funds and resources that are being promised at the global level and how they percolate down to the ground. And there is on the other hand, other side are people who are trying to work on issues such as mass deforestation and so on, but the resources aren't reaching them. So the mechanisms to actually bridge it and also to redirect a lot of mainstream resources are currently missing. And so that becomes a part of the innovation challenge. And institutional structures and institutions take a long time to change, are very culpable in actually creating the problem that we have, along with all the success that we've had. So while we've elongated the individual human life and brought a lot of people into the middle class, we also have chased the GDP, and our current economic model is exactly what gets us to an Earth overreach in August. And so unless we change that, we can't really hope to have intergenerational well-being. And so while we are working on action-oriented initiatives, we also need to think in terms of how they're leading to profound shifts in our institutional structures and our directionality. And I will end with this, which is that these changes are all very nice to speak about, but they're not going to initiate themselves. I define leadership as some kind of a heightened level of agency, and it is at all sorts of levels, at the individual level, at the organizational level, at the institutional level. But this kind of leadership is extremely important and necessary, and it's a modality. It is something one can step into, so that these new mindsets and these leadership modes and the aggressive pace, but with the critical thinking, so that one is not being superficial, is super important, and one needs to drive it. And so this is where I'm going to end, but I'm also going to end with the reminder that our current innovation approaches are woefully inadequate. We absolutely must embrace new innovation approaches and paradigms. And this meeting, this event is like, I think one should think of ourselves as the Jedi Knights, because there aren't that many such meetings happening. So the onus is disproportionate to come out with something that is remarkably effective and is distinct from what is already being done. So I'm going to cede the floor. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Bani, for sharing that and highlighting the urgency and the delta in where we need to be and where we are now, and unpacking the several aspects of that complexity. I wish we had more time to talk and discuss. I will thank you for your insights, and I'll also thank you, and on behalf of Dan here, in the urgency and the worrisome picture that you share. There is onus on us. We have agency, and we will move. And thank you for giving us a bit of inspiration on that. And one of the things you said was strategic and action-oriented. Who's going to do it and how? And Vinnova is one of the key players globally that have raised their hand and said, we want to be part of that change. And we're now going to watch a film. A mission-oriented approach for sustainable industry. And we're going to look at some of the things that Vinnova is doing, how to experience the power of a broad and mission-based collaboration to reach a sustainable industry. Thank you, Bani, and let's roll the film.
Swedish industry is represented throughout the whole country. Together, these create important value chains where raw materials are processed into climate-smart products that contribute to reducing the world's greenhouse gas emissions. As an independent player in the innovation system, Vinnova can contribute to the exploration by collecting and highlighting conflict goals, creating understanding and solutions for the big picture, and finding the right balance between different interests and needs. Due to the fact that Sweden has a good collaborative culture, we have favorable conditions to act as a test and implementation arena where we, together with industry, society and academia, work together to identify common goals and the path we want to follow.
Well, a mission-oriented approach let us come together under a common direction to explore new ways of moving forward in a very complex situation. And by looking at the whole system rather than its isolated parts, we can see new patterns emerging, which makes it easier for us to think long-term and act together in collective decision-making. And of course, this kind of approach also has its challenges. When bringing together a diverse group of people, it's easy to get stuck in conflicts and misunderstandings because we don't share a common language. But I believe that if we're able to sort of create this space for diversity to flourish rather than create an opposition, then we can really reap the fruits of this approach.
Our work here aims to employ a mission-oriented methodology for sustainable industry, in particular a production which is local and resilient. We have a global perspective for Sweden and for the role of Vinnova, and also we employ workshops which are co-creative as a tool. For 2021 and 2022, we have a hypothesis, which is that to reach common angles, we then can reach also a common statement. And this common statement can project further to, for instance, a system demonstrator. So far, we have performed workshops with participants being mixed competencies from the Swedish industrial ecosystem.
We want to share our knowledge and insight internationally to contribute to sustainable world and global climate benefits. We need to do this together. No one can do everything, but everyone can do something.
Well, thank you. Dan, so Vinnova, no one can do everything, everyone can do something. My question after listening to Bani in that huge delta and the positive film from Vinnova about what it all is done, how do you balance urgency and opportunity and the need for speed as well as planning, prudence with taxpayers' money, etc.? How do you?
I mentioned it earlier, but I think Sweden's done this before, right? In the early 20th century, again, the country went from one of the poorest countries in Europe to one of the wealthiest, really, in 1 or 2 generations. So maybe 25 years, actually, over that 1900 to 1930-ish kind of period. So that is fast. We've seen that happen here. I think what we're looking at now is doing that even faster. And so in a sense, it's prudent to have the urgency with taxpayers' money, if you see what I mean. We can't afford to go slow at this point. So it would be a waste of taxpayers' money if we were building a high carbon industry, put it that way. So we have to invest radically, quickly, sensibly, all at the same time. That's something I think we can do. We have seen that again happen before. And we really have no choice anyway. So, this is the thing. It's it has to be quick. what that film showed is there are a bunch of people ready and motivated to now put that into action. Doesn't mean no planning, doesn't mean no participation. In fact, it means more of that. But it's a very different kind of plan. It's not like a 40-year plan, 50-year plan. It's much more rapid, iterative, prototype-led, demonstrator-led, and then let's get going.
And I think sensible, one can question, because what does that mean? It's easy to say. And iterative, I find interesting, because in this fast-paced transformation, you will, and everyone will, make mistakes. And we will probably invest in suboptimal technologies because we don't have time on our side.
Yeah.
How do we communicate that? Robert started with storytelling. How do we communicate the mistakes that we will have to do along the way?
Yeah, I mean, I will talk about that later specifically in some of the prototypes that we've been doing. And my colleague Kieran Long, who's the General Director at ArcDes, the Swedish Centre for Architecture, he always says of prototypes that they're always wrong by definition, but they're kind of wrong on purpose, as in we go into them looking to explore what's possible, and we're watching very carefully and learning and adapting and discussing in real time. We don't have time for a kind of investigation and report culture there. This needs to be far more hands-on and interactive. If we let citizens into those prototypes as fellow participants with us, and we explain what's happening here. This is a test of this, let's see how it goes. This is a test of this, let's see how it goes. I think we change the dynamic around it. It's not like the old style governance culture of a select committee looking at 7 years of reports and then coming up with something. It's far more interactive and engaged. That, as you know, is the best way to do this kind of innovation.
And I think that's also a call to action for the audience here. Anyone that's a journalist in the audience or a concerned citizen, there will be mistakes along the way. And we also need to be kind in the process, humble in the process, forgiving in the process, and see it as learning. Let's go look at the next Gapminder question, which I think will indicate a bit of change. So, how many companies in the world have a woman as a top manager or CEO? Did you know the answer?
You keep testing me on this. Do you want me to make a guess?
Yes. The options are 2%, 10%, or 18%.
Yeah, I'm going to go in the somewhere between B and C, I suspect. So maybe 10%, 12%.
Well, the majority of you answered around 18% of companies around the world have women as a top manager or CEO. Let's see what the right answer is. Correct. Okay. 18%. It's the top choice of the in the multiple choice, but it's not very impressive. But why is this important, Dan?
Well, along with what we just talked about in terms of learning from failures and mistakes, which is one of the key innovation techniques, having a diverse team is one of the most important things in the first place, as in you do not learn properly. You can't do participative work unless you're a diverse team. We know that diverse teams outperform homogeneous teams every single time. You can take a homogeneous team of very well qualified, effectively scientific PhD level people. If it's all homogeneous, it will underperform compared to a diverse team with far less, let's say, educational qualifications on average. So this sense of diversity is, along with learning and participation, one of the key innovation techniques. So it's fundamental to bake that in. And that means diversity in multiple axes, not just gender and sex, as we're talking about here, obviously race, ethnic origin, but also mindset, also different income levels. Benny, the previous speaker, talks about this vertical and horizontal diversity. So this is something we need to work on. And it's something we need to work on in Sweden as well, if we're honest. We've led... I say you've led a long way with gender and made huge strides, but we now need to think of a far more diverse Swedish population than there was, say, 30 years ago. How do we do that? Is that represented?
So kind of stating the obvious here, but we can't silo this sustainability transformation. And I think Bani was saying it as well. Oh, no, I was wrong in saying this is not only a race to net zero. No. There are parallel transformations, equality, diversity, etc., that are not separated from this, but actually completely interlinked, which means that, again, it becomes even more complex, but we can't ignore, we have to do all of them at the same time.
Exactly, and it's not an engineering challenge. I think that's one of the key things. So we can't just, maybe as we did perhaps in the past with some challenges, throw a bunch of highly qualified engineers at it. That will not work with this kind of challenge when it's also social and economic and cultural. It's all of those together. So that's another kind of diversity, not just the question we looked at, but multidisciplinary, transdisciplinary approaches to innovation.
challenging indeed. But Dan, that means I will now hand over the microphone and stage to you. And we have left a lot of question marks hanging since we started at 2 o'clock. So hopefully you will be able to address some of them in your talk.
Let's see. I'm going to head over here. I think I'm on this camera. Yeah. Great. So thank you. I'm going to not give you all of those answers, Aurora. Sadly, I wish I could. I wish I could do that in 15 minutes, and then we could all go home and rest of history is resolved. But I'm going to throw up some of the work that we've been doing here at Vinnova in the last 2 to 3 years. And what you're seeing on the slides now is what we call the playbook. And the playbook is something that's come from this learning process that's been happening as we try to test missions on the ground. What does it mean to take the theory that Rowan described so eloquently, Mariana's work, Banny's work, and drop that into Sweden? So that's what we've done here. The backdrop really, as we've heard many times today, is this challenge. We are taking 21st century challenges, climate, health, public health. We haven't talked about that much today, but that's a huge challenge. Social justice, these kinds of questions. But we're evaluating them with 20th century ideas, arguably 19th century tools. I say we generally across, let's just call it the North or the West, however you want to describe that. This quote comes from Madeleine Albright, the Secretary of State, and then the US government. Rowan described very well the backdrop to missions. Again, I won't go into that in detail, but this idea of what are the equivalent moonshots for our time if the one in the 60s was around getting to the moon. Interestingly, I just put this book on, which I recommend to anybody. It was written in the early 80s, actually, by Richard Nelson, a sociologist, talking about, in the language of the early 80s, perhaps, the moon and the ghetto. Just pointing out, actually, getting to the moon is easy. Technically, it's a technical challenge, for sure. Like, it takes a lot of skill and effort and engineering. But solving the ghetto, if you like, again, sorry for the language, but it's the late 70s here, that's something that the US has never achieved, actually still hasn't achieved, clearly, as we know from the last 2 years of Black Lives Matter protests and others. It's arguably further away in some respects. So we need new approaches which balance the science and tech we might draw from the moon with alongside these new social approaches. So taking Mariana's diagram about the grand challenge, what we did was flip that into a process, because that's a structural diagram. You saw it from Rowan earlier. You have a mission aligned around a challenge, like let's say food or mobility. You break that into sectors, do a bunch of projects. We said, well, actually, let's turn that on its side, because we need to do this as a participative process. So how do we co-create that first bit? The mission. How do we figure out where the, as Banny would say, the acupuncture points are? What are the projects on the ground? So we flip that on its side through 90 degrees, and it comes this kind of process. We first of all look for angles, like what are the questions here if we take something like food? What are the different angles we can take on solving that challenge? How do we flip those into missions? That's something we co-create. And then how do we prototype, which is a test, and then scale out, which is a demonstrator, which you just heard about from my colleagues at Vinnova. So those we did lots and lots of engagement here. We probably reached about 500 different organizations over 18 months worth of workshop after meeting, after discussion, a lot of work, sketching and drawing in these kind of multidisciplinary groups, again, as diverse as we could get them. We call these kind of system in the room workshops. Here you see one on the left around mobility with somebody from a scooter startup next to somebody from Volvo Cars, next to someone from Stockholm Municipality, next to an architect, next to the energy agency. On the right-hand side, you see to do with food, actually. We had a chef, a high school student, a farmer, all working together around the system. And from that comes a sense of where are these missions? So the first mission we looked at around mobility, we looked at lots. Actually, there are about 3 or 4 main missions, pilot missions, which emerged, was around streets, knowing that streets are actually where most mobility systems collide one way or another. Not literally, although sometimes literally, unfortunately, but thanks to Vision Zero, less than they used to. So we're talking about walking, we're talking about cycling, clearly we're talking about cars, but we're also talking about e-commerce and logistics. We're talking about people driving to work, people driving to the football match, whatever. Those happen on streets. And streets, as with rivers and waterways, as I said earlier, are a connected system. In fact, every street in Sweden is connected to every other street. You don't really think of it like that, but they are literally all one system, even though we break them into parcels again. So in every street we thought could be healthy, sustainable, and full of life. Full of life is variable, obviously. If it's downtown Malmö on a Friday night or downtown Gothenburg, it might be full of life of people and bars and nightlife and so on. If it's a quiet side street in a suburb, it might be full of butterflies and bees. That's fine. They're both life, right? Every street means it's socially just as well. It can't just be the easy ones. It's got to also be ones that are currently very unhealthy, too much bad quality air, too much traffic noise, and so on. They also have to be healthy. So then we found a set of partners, because again, this is hugely about collaboration. And the first partners here were the kommuner, as we call them in Sweden, the municipalities. So the city of Stockholm, in this case, found 4 streets for us to prototype with, and happily all of those streets had schools on them, which meant that students could be the primary designers, the architects, if you like. So this is 6- and 7-year-olds working with bits of paper that they drew and cut up and so on, and we let them say, this is your street. This is a quiet street in the middle of Stockholm. It's got a school on it. You're the primary user here. This isn't done by the traffic department. It's not done by architects, although we had architects in room facilitating. It's done by the street itself, as in the users and the residents. In this case, 6-year-olds. And 6-year-olds are amazing urban designers, to be clear. We've also done that at numerous levels. This is the former Prime Minister and the Health Minister. You know, you can do this at multiple levels, but I have to say kids are often better at this, with all due respect to politicians. And this is the kind of street that came out, swings and playgrounds, of course, but seating and greenery. That was then translated by architects into something that was legal, but still captured the essence of what the kids thought. And then we thought, well, how does this scale? So we worked with Archdes here, the Swedish agency for architecture and design, who commissioned Lundberg Design, a Swedish industrial design firm, to build a set of prototype kit of parts. Now think of this a bit like IKEA or Lego or Minecraft, some system that could be super adaptable in any street almost in Sweden. And remember, all streets are largely the same on one level and completely different on the other, as in they all have parking spaces or not. They're all governed in the same way. The parking space law is national, for instance. Many cities have the same approach there. And yet every single street is different because every single community is different. The landscape is different. The history is different. So we had this diversity on top, the applications, these bits of greenery or bike parking or whatever the street decides. And then this base layer, which is this wooden boardwalk. And here you see the prototype in action. So earlier I talked with Aurora about prototyping in public, and this is happening. So this is the school children, you see on the left there, sitting on the thing that they themselves designed. And they're aware that this is a test. You know, it feels like a test, right? We actually had signs on it saying this is an experiment. But they were super proud to be part of that, and it gave them a sense of their environment can change based on their inputs. How powerful is that to get into a 6-year-old's way of thinking? You also see we're solving kind of scooter parking problems here, adding more bike parking. We then spread it to multiple cities. This is it in Gothenburg. These kind of modules are designed to scale up and down the street. You could have 30 of them in a row. You could just do 1 or 2. They're relatively cheap. They're all Swedish timber. They're all made locally. They're all designed to the street. And you can imagine then the possible visions. This is lovely work by Utopia Architecture, to then take these ideas and say, well, you know, could this be a greenhouse in time? Could it be a playground? Could it be something else? How does it relate to the street around it? How does it grow over time? These are all questions that we can use this platform for. It's a platform for asking questions, if you like. The results were interesting because usually when you take away parking spaces, I get death threats. In this case, actually, we found that most people were positive about these changes by far. In fact, we only had about 4 to 6% very negative when we did the feedback on the Stockholm streets that we prototyped. Again, most people by far, 73%, very positive or positive. And what they were looking for was more greenery, more social space, more micromobility parking. And we saw an increase, by the way, of 400% of activity by more diverse groups of people on the streets than before. Underneath all of this, and don't worry if you can't read those words, because I can't either, is a huge piece of work we call the value model, which is beginning to understand, well, what does that do? Parking revenue, for instance, is being reduced in these streets, actually. I might argue that's a good thing, personally, because it's reducing the amount of revenue associated with carbon. But clearly in the city's budgets, that's a bad thing, because the money's going down. So we need to look at, well, what does it actually generate? And if I zoom into this a bit, obviously it's doing all kinds of things. If you reduce traffic noise, you increase birdsong. That might sound like a very frivolous thing, but actually increasing birdsong increases your mental health directly. And there are researchers that have made their life's work about this. Increasing birdsong increases your ability to recuperate from illness, which would be very useful right now. This is a tiny corner of that big map that I just showed you. Clearly, it actually increases property value, should you want it to. Retailers do better on the streets without cars than with car parking in them. They never think that until you demonstrate it, but the data is there from project after project all over the world. Clearly, people's health is increasing. Clearly, people's social fabric is being wound together in a different way. All of that has value. So here we talk about a platform behind this. And this is where we start aligning the system a bit. So you see on the left-hand side, if you can read it, we have the prototypes in Gothenburg, Helsingborg, Stockholm, now Umeå, or cities all over Sweden. Underneath that, though, we have a set of consistent layers, given that those places are very different. Umeå is completely different to Malmö, obviously. And yet they have the same parking space law. So at the level of law, at the bottom of that diagram, it's the same thing. And so on the right-hand side there, we have Transport Styrelsen as a partner. They're the regulatory authority for transport in Sweden. If you want to change the law or innovate with it in some way or test it with a policy lab, you need Transport Styrelsen on board. They're never usually on board in a small project like that, as you can imagine, the one I just showed you. So this is where we balance this system impact, maybe changing the parking space law, say as per Japan. In Japan, there is no on-street parking, and there hasn't been since 1965. You know, it's an enormous shift across the country. What if we could do that in Sweden? What if we test that? Difficult to say. We need Transport Styrelsen on board. But we have players all the way up and down that picture. Scooter companies like Voi, car companies like Volvo Cars, Volvo M Car Sharing, and others. They've all been part of this project. And this is one of then multiple projects all heading towards this shift in the street that I talked about. The value model, the tests on the ground, there's documentaries being made, there's policy labs running, and so on. Related to this is our second mission pilot, because we ran one around mobility, like I said, the street one. The second one was around food, and within that we looked again at multiple things, new types of food, different types of farming and so on, and done the groundwork for missions there. But school food is an enormous system in Sweden. It's almost half of the meals served every single day in Sweden. We spend about 7 billion crowns on it a year as the public sector. So it's an enormous system. You could use this as a lever to shift much of the food system behind it, in fact. It's so big. So how could we ensure this mission? Every student in Sweden eats sustainable and tasty school food. Tasty is really hard to regulate for. Obviously, I'm not proposing an official government taster here necessarily, so that's an interesting challenge right there. But if you know if it's not tasty, the kids aren't going to eat it and the whole thing's pointless. Has to be sustainable and healthy. Has to be every student in Sweden because, again, of social justice questions and long tradition in Sweden of that. So here we have lovely prototypes again on the ground with Kommuna like Hofors, where they're testing how kids understand how kids understand where food comes from in the school, linking that to a local science center, local farms, them testing new food together. In Karlstad, they've looked at the meal environment. And again, a bit like with the school kids in the previous mission, have redesigned their school restaurant and canteen. And here you see the architect's drawings based on their input, and you see the prototype being built there in Karlstad. In Vallentuna, they're looking at new types of food and how they get kids interested in tasting new things, in this case, tofu, actually, and then all of the different meals you could do with that. And this one here is Munkedal, and it's a similar kind of thing around encouraging more adventurous tasting, but then also looking at the school grounds as a marketplace in the weekends, like a food market and food hall. So then here's the I don't know whether those sausages are sustainable, but let's hope that they are. Here's a Munkedal playground turned into a food market at the weekend. So in both of those cases, we're looking at this kind of using our existing investments, our existing capabilities from a public sector side. That includes Vinnova's funding, of course, but there's far more funding actually flowing through those communa around things like streets and school food. So how do we use those existing systems to transform in new ways to pull different outputs out of them? So that's a big shift from this kind of stakeholders to participants. We started with the stakeholders, but then we start moving towards the participants over time. It's bending existing systems in new directions. If you see this funny graph on the left, 7 billion crowns invested in school food, currently sort of bent towards hygiene and cost. What if we bend that existing investment towards sustainability, health, learning, social justice, hygiene, cost, and so on? And that's where you see Gothenburg's municipal budget, for instance, is far bigger than Vinnova's or the school food budget. It's a very powerful system. So again, taking one parking space, then experimenting at the scale of a street, and then a school, and then building the learning to enable all the streets in Sweden. How do we do that kind of flip? And then how do we build this thing as a platform for exploring questions in public? So all of the question marks you can imagine around those things, they become this ongoing real-time experiment in real life. We call this the kind of snowball, actually, which seemed like an appropriate metaphor for Sweden when I came up with it. But I mean, start small, start the ball rolling as quickly as possible, and add actors as you go. And as the thing rolls down the hill, it gathers. So we didn't start with the Prime Minister, we started with 6-year-olds. And by taking that real-life example through the streets, real people, real change there. Again, it seems very small, but you can see we have all of the system in play behind it, the whole DNA of all of the streets in Sweden, or with the school food thing, all of the agencies involved in food collaborating together so that you can keep on adding municipalities as you roll. So that's where I'll end, I think, just sharing those examples. This is, again, in this kind of playbook, which I'm actually going to talk about that tomorrow, by the way. A little plug for that one at a greater length, should you wish to see that. And on Thursday, we have a workshop at 9:30 CET looking at this kind of example. Those are the kind of summaries I've talked about. A clear shared direction, heavy collaboration, systems-led approach, participation to the fore and looking at different types of value, prototyping for testing and experimenting, but with this idea of the platform for scaling. So again, the DNA on board from day one, but then scaling over time. And what our job is here as Vinnova is that we're not doing all of this stuff. Obviously, it's a huge effort by lots of other people, but we can be the cement between the bricks here, or the glue between these different elements of the system. I will leave it there.
Thank you, Dan. And thank you, Dan, for demonstrating what you do, making it a bit more tangible for us, your work. And I think many will agree with me that this participatory aspect of this transformation intuitively makes sense. But if I'm allowed to address a cynical elephant in the room, is do we have time to have a participatory element in all parts of this hugely complex transformation? As some parts of it, in theory, you know exactly what we need to do. We were talking backstage about aviation and the fact that we now have thousands of empty planes in these ghost planes as part of COVID. And we're not changing that really, and they're just spewing out emissions. How do we deal with the participatory part and the clock?
Yeah, that's a huge question, because heart of that is how do we do things like big democratic decisions about complex systems. What I've seen missions really good for is this participative element, really systemic, on-the-ground stuff. And I can see we did those streets in a matter of months. I mean, literally like 3 months. And they can trigger simultaneously all across Sweden. You don't have to do one city, then the next, then the next. You know, this is in parallel, that kind of transformation, if we get that right. So think of multiple snowballs rolling in that case. And then you think, well, maybe we could change all of the streets in Sweden or all the school food in Sweden within a matter of years. It's entirely possible to imagine that. So I think it's very good for that kind of thing. Different types of value, different types of financing, they're all on the table there. Your specific example, that seems to me like another innovation question altogether. And so do we need missions for that? Maybe we need a mission around aviation. We need a mission around aviation fuel, but that could be more of a technological one. This is a regulatory policy lab question. If you highlight it as clearly as you did, the ghost flights thing, it's absurd that that happens.
But it's the absurdness that I find interesting, because no one would say we should continue to do it.
Yeah.
But we still don't have the mechanisms to quickly press the button going, this doesn't fit in with this other mission that we're working on.
Yeah, I think, well, this is a great example. Aviation, a bit like oceans, as I said earlier, are supranational questions. They're not something that national governments, actually, I say working at one, are very good at. Because aviation, by definition, usually is an international issue. And so there we need to think about, well, what kind of entities could lead missions at that scale? The EU maybe is one, but even that's not big enough for aviation. The UN, well, they're not used to doing that kind of work. So we will need, for that kind of challenge, where it's multinational, multi-system questions, we'll need some very, very new democratic bodies or equivalent to make that kind of.
And maybe we still need a participatory element in those stakeholders.
Yeah.
But going back to food, which is obviously an interesting aspect because it's plugged into so many parts of the sustainability transformation. We have a film on that, right?
Yeah, we're going to show you some of the school food work that we've been doing. I gave you a brief glimpse of it there. Again, very, very student-led, as you can see there, but really beginning to work through, again, how does a municipality think about food creatively? Not as just something you need to put into people to keep them alive and to fuel them, but actually how does it stimulate learning? How do they learn about the world through that? You could teach any subject using food, pretty much, actually, at school. But currently, there's a separate systems, education and food. So the film, hopefully, will begin to put that together for you and, again, make this more tangible. What does it look like on the ground?
Let's roll the film.
We are facing great challenges when it comes to achieving a healthy and sustainable future. And the world leaders, they have agreed to achieve the sustainability goals. But to achieve them, we have to work in many areas at the same time. And one crucial sector to work with is the food system. Food is the single largest contributor to the challenges we face. And 1/3 of all food produced is wasted. Yet, there are 800 million people that face hunger. At the same time, obesity is one of the biggest health risks in the world. In addition, food production of today contributes hugely to biodiversity loss and emits a large proportion of greenhouse gases.
We will need to transform the entire food system. So where do we start? Well, look at food in schools. Schools, they cook, they purchase, they serve a huge amount of food. And the eating habits of entire generations are partly forged at school. So school meals provides an opportunity to transform the system as a whole. We need to bring together key players and work together towards shared, bold, and engaging goals. And we need to work in a way that enables us to learn. We do this with the prototypes.
So we want to start early and to get these younger kids curious about eating new food, perhaps unknown to them. For example, plant-based food.
Yes, the whole build-up is trying to make them excited.
Gott. Kul. As far as we see today, they are very curious and excited about it. So it's great.
Jag tyckte också det var kul och spännande. Jag läste på ett mjölkpaket en gång och då sa det att man kunde vara miljöhjälte, så det ville jag bli det.
Through research and broad engagement, we have identified some areas that could have the greatest effects in achieving the goal. We call them levers. They work in a way that a small shift in a lever will impact multiple aspects of the system. The levers in our school food system includes, for example, to involve students and school staff in developing school meals, or ways to shape and design the school meal environment, or a way of hooking school food into the curriculum.
We've started off with a school restaurant that was very pale, ordinary.
Men det var ganska grått, väldigt vanligt. Alla gråa stolar, gråa bord. Det var en vanlig vardag och det var inte så jättekul.
Istället så åker man kanske någon annanstans till McDonald's eller Pekos eller liknande.
And we wanted to make a change and involve the students, and that's been a really big part of this project. They had so many ideas, and ideas that we didn't think of.
Eleverna själva så kommer med förslag i alla årskurser också.
Jag tycker att det är mycket bättre här i matsalen just nu än vad det var förr.
Maten blir typ godare fast det inte är förändring i maten. Så det är väldigt, väldigt fint.
När vi ska göra något sånt här som ska gagna eleverna så är det viktigast för mig har varit att se till att det har varit ett reellt elevinflytande. Och det känner ju jag att det verkligen har varit här. De är jättestolta av de elever som har medverkat i workshopen som ligger till grund för hur det blev.
We use a mission-oriented innovation approach to align these various aspects in a clear and compelling direction. And our mission is that every child in Sweden eats healthy, sustainable, and tasty school food. So the work here from Vallentuna and Karlstad are only 2 out of 10 of the mission's prototypes. Each prototype is designed to target several levers, and since each lever affects multiple parts of the system, this can unlock a kind of ripple effect of interactions on a system level. And given the scale of the school food system, this begins to affect the broader food system behind it.
Nu får man förändring på ett väldigt bra sätt.
Och många fler matgäster har vi haft. Så det känns jätteroligt.
So it's been an exciting progress, and we have still a lot to learn and change, but it happens so fast as well.
Well, fascinating indeed. And we have a question from the audience for you, Dan. Please welcome, state your name and your question for Dan. Can you hear us?
Hello, can you
Hi.
hear me?
Yes.
Hi. So thank you for letting me speak. My name is Joanna Boquist and I'm Vinnova's representative in Israel. So I would just like to make an observation or share a general reflection from my experience here in Israel, which is very different from Sweden, especially in terms of school meals. Now, first of all, Israel does not necessarily have a background of focusing on health issues or environmental issues, yet it is leading in many of these sectors that are becoming increasingly important in these fields. And why is that? Well, the choices Israel has made leading to where they are today are largely a factor of necessity. It's a small country of which half is desert. It's surrounded by antagonistic neighbors, and it has one of the highest population growths in the world. So Israel has been kind of forced to develop innovative water solutions such as sewage purification and drip agriculture. It has been forced to adapt its crops to a hot desert climate with access to only brackish water. It has been forced to become self-reliant and make the most out of every single resource available to innovate in other areas such as high tech to support the structures being built here. And I believe this is one of the reasons Israel is leading in food tech solutions and why we should work together with Israel, Sweden that is. An example of this is what you see in supermarkets and restaurants here. It's almost only local produce, very little imports, tons of fruits and vegetables, and only what is in season. Meat is sold mostly at the butchers. So the government has identified now an area of strategic growth that is alternative proteins. And the reasons for this is, sure, partially environmental, but again, mostly practical. How do they feed a growing population of a land that cannot support enough animals to produce meat for all? So lab-grown meat has become a rapidly growing sector. Meat cells have now been successfully grown into steaks, although not yet served to the general public. And other focus areas in alternative proteins, like meat substitutes and fermentation-based produce, are being made. So just to conclude and to tie this into the subject of school meals, I would say that this is an area where Israel is lagging behind. As in many parts of the world, lunches are brought from home. Meals consist of sandwiches, pizza, burgers, falafel with fillings, and so on. And there is no holistic picture of the connection between a nutritious school lunch, happy school children, and a sustainable world. So this is an area where we see an opportunity to collaborate. But for now, the general diet of locally grown fruits and vegetables and little meat keeps the population healthy, and solutions are sustainable, even though Israel needs to step up and become mission-oriented in this sense. So that wasn't a question, that was a long comment.
It was super interesting, thank you. And it occurs to me, as you said, that Israel and Sweden are not so similar in several respects. I think you said half desert, antagonistic neighbors, and lots of local food. Well, Sweden is probably half lakes. Its neighbors are friendly-ish quite often, and we import a lot of food, actually. So I think we can learn a lot in return here. There's a two-way relationship. Maybe what we can share about school food can begin to change the way that food is thought about from the student's point of view. Because as you say, if we're going to be eating alternative proteins, having 6-year-olds getting their taste buds around that as early as possible will help massively by the time they're making purchasing decisions of their own. But we also need to learn in return, and we're also very interested in questions of algae, for instance, and also lab-grown meat, of course, and as well as pulses and beans and other types of proteins, bringing those back into the Swedish diet. So thank you. I think, yes, comment in return to your comment. I think there's a ton to learn in both directions.
And this bridges nicely into the next panel, because it's also about collaboration between different parts of society as well as internationally.
Yeah, so we're going to welcome back a couple of people, actually. Rowan, my colleague at IPP from earlier at UCL, who you'd have before. So she's joining back. And then Daria Isaksson as well, the General Director of Vinnova, who kicked off the day. So welcome back, Daria, as well. But we're also joined by Erika Augustinansson, sorry for mangling your name like that.
Butchered that.
Let me try.
You've done everything so perfectly.
Augustinsson.
There you go.
Close. The innovation strategist at Blekinge. So we want to also then talk at these multiple levels now. We have Rowan's international perspective, Daria from the national perspective, and then the regional level as well. So perhaps I can start with you, Rowan, though, actually, because you gave a great backdrop, thank you, earlier to missions and where they came from, really, and with the work of yourself and Mariana Mazzucato and others at the Institute there, and many places across the world beginning to test that now. So maybe you could give us a few examples of those, some international examples of missions you think are worth watching. Obviously not the Swedish ones, we just heard about those. But where else might we look to? Any emerging ideas that are interesting or any developed projects taken to fruition?
I think that it's worth thinking about the multiple different ways. I think you were alluding to this in your last question, that you can approach missions, because they all look very different. So there are quite a number of missions on the go, as I illustrated with that kind of map that I showed, showing the kind of growth and the trajectory of mission-oriented innovation policy. But they show up in different kinds of projects in different ways. So I would say there are some programs that are what we, industrial policy led and might be conceived as, they can fit in a sort of DARPA-like model or an advanced research and project agency type model. Some projects can. They have to be relatively narrow and technical in scope and clearly solvable by one institution. But there are a range of those different activities going on. And you see CSIRO, for example, in Australia, taking quite a structured approach in that way, looking at technical challenges of how do we think about on-farm innovation for the kinds of droughts that we will see, specifically in the context of Australia, and how will we drive missions towards having effective farming, even with climate adaptation challenges. So you see innovation agencies operating in this very quite structured way that is driven by an innovation policy that is set at government level, but then deployed through an agency.
Right.
You then have these kind of more place-based missions that you've referred to in a range of different ways. Sometimes those are regionally driven. So we've engaged with quite a number of cities or regional regions around the world, specifically working with cities like Valencia and Barcelona in Spain, where they have set some clear, and they deal with this challenge of participation, which is ongoing deliberation through citizens engagement or citizens panels, which means that instead of it being this kind of one-stop participation, you have it built into the fabric and the design. And then you have a range of other ones which are more sort of investment portfolio. So I would say really good example is NYSERDA in the region of New York, which is focusing on energy transition and having a mixed portfolio to do that, but very much with the goal in mind.
Right. And if I can pick up something else you talked about earlier, or you alluded to right at the end of your talk, was really a different perspective around financing or even the economic model underpinning it. And Aurora, I were just talking about this in the break. As our colleague Mariana sometimes says, when there's a war, no one asks where the money is going to come from for the military. You sort of make that happen. Daria, I might come to you in a moment to reflect on the recovery funds at the national level and how that conversation was different. But how are there any missions that are working in this direction towards rethinking the economic model behind it? I think you said sort of outcomes first, or broader societal outcomes first, and profit was a secondary issue. Which ones should we look to that are doing innovation in that area, if any?
So I think that they're all. I think no one likes to say there will be no return on investment. I think it's reframing the concept of value creation through the missions, and the key thing is that you're not having a single consumer market that you're aiming to, but you will create value, but the profits or the benefits may accrue to a wider set of stakeholders than the original investor. So actually there's a need to start defining what is the return on investment, because it may not be a one-to-one relationship between investor and then, patient finance deriving whatever rate of return they have an expectation to, because that will only get you patient investment in kind of clean energy. It won't do these more complex projects. But there is a challenge on what you just said there around, is it like a war? You'll see that through COVID, we've unlocked huge amounts of war chest type funding, but that isn't also sustainable in its own right. So you need to be able to start prototyping the kinds of new financial interactions between public and private partnerships that will derive different kinds of return on investment. And I think that because we have such very clear understanding of how finance flows, we don't like to change the rules of the macroeconomic game. And that's this kind of thing that we will just need to start understanding what it looks like, because there are no pioneering alternative, but there are quite a lot of explorations into those different kinds of alternatives, looking largely at patient finance.
Right. So Daria, in that sense, you working at the national level, you will have been close to some of those conversations about recovery funds. And obviously the agency level in Sweden is slightly different to the ministerial level, but you would have been close enough to sense that maybe these recovery funds did have a different ethos behind them. Well, first of all, I suppose, is that true? And then secondly, how did you think about that from a Vinnova point of view? Were there actions that you were taking around recovery, for instance, recovery funding in a different way?
Well, I could put it this way. National government agencies for sure are instrumental in implementing the recovery funds in various ways. Not so much, especially Vinnova in the Swedish context, but many of our sister agencies even more so. And I think regardless of, now we heard that, that type of major effort might not be sustainable or might not, but nonetheless, the fact that we have it now, if we just look at what we have, our generation, this is in a way the opportunity of our lifetime. It's major investments being done by the public sector into helping companies and organizations alike to manage this pandemic and the effects of it. And then at the same time, we have learned so much during this pandemic in terms of opportunities for working in different ways, in terms of, we really, from many, many ways, are reshaping our organizations, our ways of working. So I would say now is the time to make sure that we use these funds as wisely as possible, that we make sure that they invest into the future. So we will see, I think, internationally, and we're actually funding research into that now. What are these recovery funds actually? What do they look like when they're being implemented? Surely there will be money provided to, existing businesses that, in a way, got us into this situation in the first place. But, to the extent that we should just commit to something, it should be making sure that we invest wisely into the future as far as possible. So that would be a reflection. And I think there are still good opportunities to make sure that we do that. And I think there are examples of it as well.
Well, exactly. We're still in the middle of this pandemic, it seems like. So that's one thing. But you mentioned internationally there as well. And so with Sweden's global impact in mind, one of our issues is that our climate footprint as a country is largely outside of our borders. So the work that I showed us doing in Hofors and Karlstad is all very well and good and super good, but our big impact is external, outside of Sweden. How do you think about that from Vinnova's point of view, again, as a national agency, but working with industries that have global footprint?
Well, it's true, first of all. Our impact is primarily outside of our own borders. And that's why it's very encouraging then to see the leadership in industry, where we notice that Swedish multinational, regardless, be it in finance, production, retail, etc., are committing to scientific targets, are committing to making sure that they drive this transformation through their value chains. So actually existing value chains can also be vehicles that help drive the transformation. I think it's essential. Coming then to what does that mean to us as a innovation agency? Well, we need to support it in funding the research and innovation that we know is critical to provide the competencies, the knowledge, and opportunities for innovation that will help drive this. And that means, for instance, research related to just one example would be research in relation to mainstreaming the reporting frameworks needed to get both the transparency that we need and the information and data flows that we need to enable true circularity, for one example, or the continuous investments into research and innovation in new materials. We know that materials in industry everywhere need to be replaced with sustainable materials. They need to be circular. The collaborations and the partnerships, both public and private, within Sweden and outside our borders, that can really bring out these new circular value chains or circular value cycles, if you will. Yeah. So everything we do naturally is not about bringing about innovations in Sweden and drive our own transformation, but really to have an impact in the world. And that means that also this research and innovation needs to be done in continuous collaboration, strong partnerships with partners outside of Sweden. So coming back to why we're all here today.
Oh, absolutely. Great, thank you. And Erika, zooming into you. So now at the regional level that you're responsible for the innovation within, can you begin to give us some sense of how you see this from your point of view? How do you work as a region in a collaborative way? How do we get away, perhaps, as we've talked about a few times today, from thinking of regions as sort of their own things separate to everything else, but instead working in collaboration across multi-region partnerships, or the kind of value chain that Daria just described, where Blekinge might be connected to somewhere globally? Do you have a way of thinking about that?
Absolutely. I think that I just wanted to briefly say that I think that we've done some quite clever policy experimentation in Blekinge in approaching the missions method, because basically what we've done is that we've mobilized the knowledge that we have within our smart specialization areas and apply this to suitable missions appointed by the EU. So we work with healthy oceans and waters, for example, as was shown in the film before. And so this means that mission-oriented innovation is the backbone of our innovation strategy. And this, in return, gives us a direction that we've talked about a lot. And so far, we can see that this has had a fantastic mobilizing effect in our region from now. So, and also to tick the boxes that you talked about before, Dan, we work with both of these methods that are smart specialization and mission-oriented innovation. They have a similar approach. So that's what we discovered. And so they're place-based, emphasize collaboration between stakeholders and citizens. And so this alignment, as far as I know, has not really been done in Europe so far. So I think that's an attempt from our side to align the for-profit innovation development that we've been talking about with the mission-oriented innovation development. And so up until now, it's had quite a fantastic mobilizing effect, I would say.
That's so good to hear. And while we have you, if I can ask almost a cheeky question, or ask you to be cheeky, if you have the general director of the innovation agency here, how can Vinnova help? What do you need Vinnova to do, or the government agency level to help you specifically at the regional level? Are there things that we need to change about our practice, or how closely would you like to work in real collaboration with us around these things?
I think that that's one of our main goals as of now, because what we're looking for right now are other sort of pioneering regions and cities and organizations that want to team up with us so that we can work together, because that's a goal for us to do. And but as of now, during the 2 years, we've been working with mission-oriented innovation and smart specialization. I would say that we've had very little support from the national level. I'm a bit disappointed at that. So almost all the work that we've done have been supported from EU. So I think that would be very important, that we have the national initiatives and the national programs that are better aligned with the mission-oriented approach. Otherwise, we're going to create policy that inhibit innovation instead of supporting it. And I have to say that I think that so far it's basically just Vinnova who has supported us in our development. So maybe that's also because we're good storytellers.
For sure. But that's also then a good link for me to bring in Daria back again, I think. So how would you respond as well to what we just heard from Erika about this wider question?
Yeah, well, thank you. So there's much to say. First of all, I'm super happy to notice, and I think that we're hearing this in many ways now, that mission-oriented work practices are really gaining momentum, and we have a lot of examples from Vinnova connected initiatives, but also others. I think I'd like to pick up on, I take it that you're thinking about the mission related to oceans. If we look at, for instance, the climate neutral and smart cities, it has come farther in terms of connecting from the EU level to the national level to the local level. And one thing you mentioned that made me very happy, that I would say is also a trend, is that you mentioned that you've been doing regulatory experiments. So what we're seeing now is the examples you gave, Helsingborg, we have a number of municipalities now locally experimenting also with regulation and policy sandboxes, if you will. We have initiatives on the national level initiated by government, and we have a really good dialogue with the EU Commission as well of using this tool in connection to the EU framework programs. We see it happen in the program of digital, connected to test and experimentation facilities, and it would be fantastic to do the same in connection to missions. So I think if we look towards the place-based innovation in terms of cities, we by now have a rather well developed way of working from the local to the EU. But there's a lot of work to be done, so I will definitely continue to think about oceans that I know you have worked quite a bit with them.
No, super good. And Aurora, did you want to ask a question as well?
Well, it's fascinating to sit and listen, and I've been reflecting on some of the comments and tying into what Bani was saying earlier today about redefining success. And Ron, you started, and I just wanted to pick up on a comment that you made. No one wants to talk about, and then you started talking about the profitability and the costs around these things. And again, maybe a question to you, Daria, as well. Like, isn't that elephant in the room, that no one wants to talk about the cost, that is such a difficult aspect of this transformation, that we need to have that in the forefront in everything that we do?
Well, that's one way of framing it. Another one is saying, from many perspectives, you would hear the opposite being said. Lack of money is not the main problem. We say sense of urgency. How do we define actually success would be maybe even more important. And I think whenever we talk about cost, you're looking now at, for instance, risk assessment tools, making it very clear to institutional investors that the cost of not investing in the future is beginning to drive substantial costs. So, we can have this discussion. We would need to have it perhaps a bit deeper. But in terms of, I would say, sense of urgency, the willingness to invest and take risk together is actually very crucial at this point. And let's not use lack of money as the excuse. Let's work with all the resources we've got and build from there.
Yeah, and Rowan, maybe would you like to close this out by reflecting on that as well? Because we and I have talked many times about this, but I suppose our work in school food, for example, maybe also with Blekinge, is seeing the existing cost of school food rather as an investment in food, an investment therefore in health and education and sustainable farming and logistics and so on. But that reframing of cost to investment is not just a matter of slipping it from one side of the Excel spreadsheet to another. It's a mindset change. So what about the work of IEPP in this respect in terms of shifting the philosophy around these things almost?
Yes, absolutely. Because I think for clarity, I think that everyone wants to talk about money. But I think within that, wanting to talk about money, I don't think we pause enough to understand what needs to change in the way money flows. Because that kind of, there is huge pivot towards money being repurposed towards impact and impactful innovation. What you then need to look at is then how do you unlock that money? And things like ESG have given you an investable proposition, which means that now there is money that can be diverted into these kind of missions. I think the work that hasn't quite been done yet really is when you were talking about risk and material risk, is that the material risk is not held of say, for example, environmental degradation. That's not held by the investor at the moment. It doesn't show up currently on an investment risk portfolio. So that being able to see how, and that's where the innovation needs to work. And there is work being done in terms of anticipatory innovation and anticipatory regulation that is starting to look at this in the round. But I think that we come to these conversations sometimes with the idea that we know how to do finance, and we need to start thinking maybe about doing finance in a different way. And so therefore we need to talk about that without necessarily committing, this is how we do finance now. So I'm probably being a bit too ambiguous there, but there's a lot of new anticipatory innovation that's looking at this kind of work.
Super interesting and very, very good to hear. So thank you to all three of you. Thank Erika, Rowan and Daria for that. A very interesting discussion. Thanks for joining us from your various places. Aurora.
Well, thank you. I found that fascinating, and I think we can now move from the conceptual mission, theoretical academic level, as well as the regional level, to the ground where the innovation is happening. Because during Sweden Innovation Days, hundreds of startups and scale-ups from 10 different countries meet over 90 national corporates and public organizations in curated matchmaking meetings to ignite innovation through startups and corporate collaborations, if you want. And throughout this event, as we heard earlier today, 470 meetings will be held in the matchmaking is all based on the needs of the corporates in regards to their work towards the global goals. In this session, we will actually be able to meet two of the startups from this matchmaking. Israeli startup Solutum and the Brazilian startup DESG to learn more about their new technology. So I'd like to welcome Mike Mayer, Director in Business Development, Solutum, and I probably mispronounced the name of your company, I'm sorry, and Paulo C. Miranda, the co-founder and CSO of Deep ESG. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
So tell me, Paulo, let's start with you. What are you building?
We are a software platform to enterprise and financial markets. And our goal as a company, speaking of missions, we are a very mission-driven company. And what we're trying to address with our software is to solve what we consider to be one of the most challenging issues in sustainability: how to calculate disclosure information, financial information from companies are uniform in a global scale way in terms of impact in real time. We cannot address environmental, social impact if we don't understand and address the dimension of that impact on a day-to-day basis of a company. Capital flows, decisions about investments, everything needs to be assessed in terms of the impact that happens today, not 6 months from now and not 6 months past. Companies and capital owners need to understand that the flow of capital, investment decisions, everything has to do with impact, be it environmental impact, social impact, and even other kinds of extended impact. So our platform is designed to allow companies and asset owners and capital managers and decision makers to understand the extension of impact over their day-to-day operation in these companies.
Thank you for that. And Mike, on your end, what are you building? Share with us.
Sure. The motivation for starting our company was that we wanted to solve the massive pollution problems we have in our fresh water and the marine waters. You're all aware of these 5 huge plastic islands in our oceans. So we decided we're going to solve this issue. And what we've developed is a novel material which for all intents and purposes looks like plastic, feels like plastic, behaves like plastic, but has a couple of very, very special characteristics. One is that when it comes in contact with water, it will dissolve and then fully biodegrade into H2O, CO2, and biomass, leaving no toxic residue and no microplastic. What's more important is that we control the time from when our plastic comes in contact with water until the dissolve process starts. This could be almost immediately, could be a few minutes, a few days, a few weeks, or even a few months. So this makes us very applicable for a very wide range of applications, especially in the single-use plastic space. And we all know how much pollution we're all suffering from the single-use plastic.
Thank you for sharing that, and thank you for participating in this matchmaking that we've organized. And earlier today, we showed a word cloud visualizing most of the common needs from the corporates that they were looking for. And both carbon tracking, obviously, and sustainable materials were listed. And I'd be curious to hear, and I think the audience as well, have you had your matchmaking yet? And what are you looking for here at Sweden Innovation Days?
Actually, our matchmaking starts in the next couple of days. Okay, we're looking forward to that. But basically, as a startup, we're always looking for funding. So, hey, if we can find some investors, it'll be great. We're also looking to find J venture partners or licensee partners that will manufacture our materials in different territories and different countries. So this is my main aim of having these meetings in the next couple of days.
Yeah, I think we are a somewhat similar situation. In fact, I did have today already the first matchmaking session earlier with a Japanese company. So I had to be very up. And our goal, having this opportunity, is really to address how our platform is trying to solve a very huge challenge. And at this stage of our company, also in the early stage, we are seeking investment from abroad, from elsewhere, to put the position of the company in a much higher scale that we are today. We can address measuring impact and making financial assessments based on a sustainability view of the finances of a company. And to do that, we wanted to be able to do that on a global scale. So I think when we are in an event like this, we have opportunity to expose a little bit what we're doing, trying to show that in order for us to be successful in managing sustainability, we need to look deep into finances of a company and making asset owners to understand that return of investment is measured by sustainability impact and not only or exclusively by the financial aspect of that.
Thank you. Thank you for participating. Thank you for joining, and thank you for sharing. I hope that these next few days is fruitful in terms of both fundraising and partnerships and connections. And please share with us how it's been in the meetings that you've had. Thank you.
We will. My pleasure. Thank you.
Dan, does this mean day one is almost over for us?
Almost.
Yeah. One day got down, 3 to go. And I feel emotionally a combination of a little frustrated, fear and urgency, but also hopeful at the same time.
That's good. Well, we talked about diversity. There's a diversity of feelings going on within you. That's a good start.
We've had a lot of interesting talks and a lot of redefining, and I've learned a lot about missions and transformations. But I thought, let's start with you, Regina. You've been listening in throughout the day and you kicked us off. What were your highlights today?
Well, my highlights, I think it's been great to hear, from the theoretical part, what do we mean with missions. What are we talking about? What do we mean with system innovation? Just to explain this, the fundamental tools that we are pinpointing at as very important for the future. So I think the highlights have definitely been that to show the theoretical part, but also the practical part, because the theoretical part is nothing if we don't have an impact in society. So what we wanted to do today is to show the how. What are we talking about and how are we doing it? And also to share, it haven't been a success from day one, Dan. I mean, you've been doing the pilots from the beginning here since 2 years back when we started. And it's not everything has been perfect, but also to share that. And I think that the different other sessions that we have and the side events are part of sharing both the good and the bad, or the less good, if you want to be really positive. And most importantly, of course, to show that we're walking the talk. We have ministries supporting this. We have general directors of the most important government agencies that can make this happen. And they are really pushing for, let's stop talking, let's just do this together here in Sweden to show the world that it can be done. And then, of course, internationally, because we have the same goals already, so we don't have to discuss that. We already speak the same language when it comes to the sustainable development goals. So just, let's start walking and do this together. So I definitely the highlights have been these sessions, hearing the experts, and then seeing the movies with our colleagues all around the Swedish innovation ecosystem, trying this out. Everything from, finding out how do we design a joint mission to having the pilots in the different municipalities around Sweden. And then also super cool that you have a region that has taken, the task that they have in working with smart specialization, and they level it up by, synchronizing it with missions way of thinking. So I think that's super cool. And I think we have managed to show that innovation is so much broader than triple helix. I know that the world is super impressed that Sweden has been one of the first countries in the world, if not the first country in the world, that started with triple helix. But it's not enough. It's not enough. And when we work with our bilateral collaborations, we need to think much, much broadly. We need to find, and again, we already have the goal set. We can just try to identify the common missions and work in an international perspective and collaborate to achieve this. I think that's, we have to go, that's the way forward so we can make a real impact. And tomorrow, I'm not going to talk tomorrow, you're going to mention tomorrow, but I mean, maybe you too shy, Dan, but you will have a great session where we share the tools to take this one step further. And that's really, that's a super bonus during these days, I would say. So that, yes, a lot of things said, sorry, but it's it's been a great first day. So I hope everyone continues to join us the rest of the event.
Thank you for sharing that. And Dan, we started the day with we need to innovate how we innovate. And during the course of the day, I've learned that you're the author of this tongue-twisting one-liner, which I think you should be very proud of.
Apologies.
You should be proud. But do you feel, or would you like to highlight a few of the things that we've talked about today that underpins this innovate how we innovate?
Yeah, I mean, I think also building on what Regina was just saying there, that we're now beginning to show what that looks like, just beginning to, and as she alluded to, it's hard, it's super hard to turn around oil tankers and not make them oil tankers. So it's been very hard work on the ground, but you begin to see with the film from Blekinge, from taking plastic out of the ocean and turning it into something else. We're beginning to see these are the kinds of transformations, which then, if shared and scaled in different ways, could really genuinely make a difference. So when I think about those things that we talked about earlier, this sense of urgency versus care, how do we get that right? Really hard. How do we prototype and experiment and move quickly, but without wrecking things, without without sort of moving fast and breaking things, as Silicon Valley said. We cannot do that. That's inappropriate for this kind of thing when we're dealing with real people, real environments. So
we can't be perfect.
But we can't be, no, we didn't, as you said in English sometimes, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. You know, we have to make sure that things are good. But that means moving quickly. I think this cost versus investment, what Rowan was bringing up around this different financial model, we really have to figure that one out. How do we get shared return, where we're used to having individualized returns? But then so I think, I'd say this balancing act of urgency and risk, and then cost and shared return and participation, which I've talked about a lot today. Those are the kind of key themes. But coming back again to what Regina was saying, you can begin to see those seeds sprouting, and now we need to just get behind that.
And what Bani was saying as well, there is what he called a wicked fork. There's a delta between what we're saying that we need to do and what we're actually doing. So that it is important that we both speed up, get it right. And to highlight what you said, Regina, it's not enough. We will have more because it is not enough. At 17:10, there's a fireside chat with Darja Isaksson to hear more of her thoughts. And 17:35, founder's session with Surf Cleaner. And we will continue tomorrow. You'll be here, Dan, as well?
I will, yeah. I'm going to go into a bit more detail behind all of that mission stuff and talk about the playbook that we're going to share imminently, which contains all of that learning from the last few years.
The theme is preventive health, and I hope to see you tomorrow. The session's stage starts at 8:50, and I'll see you at 2 p.m.